Good evening, members. Welcome. Seems a long time since we met. For anybody watching online, this is the BCP Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting. My name is Councillor Stephen Bartlett, and I'm the chairman of this board. Before we start the meeting, unfortunately, I have some notices, some very sad events have occurred, and I'd just like to advise you of the sad passing of Councillor Brian Castle. And I'd like us to take a brief moment to honour his memory. And also, I'm afraid, another passing of Freeman and Alderman of Bournemouth, Robert Chapman, who was actually served Bournemouth Council and its predecessing organisations for over 37 years. I know him well. Other members here will know him well. So what I'd like to do is just take a few moments to just reflect and a period of silent respect on their behalf. So, okay, thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you. So I'll just hand over to Democratic Services, Claire, to give us some administration notices for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast, and it will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. For those in the room, please note the fire alarm sounds. Please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front car park. Finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning down the volume on microphones and laptops. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Agenda item on apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Substitute members? No,
we have no substitute members for this meeting, but just to note that Councillor Claire Waite and Councillor Felicity Rice have joined us online.
Okay, good evening. Claire, if you're there and you can hear me, welcome to this board meeting, which I believe is your first. So welcome. Item 3, declarations of interest. Members, do any members have any declarations of interest they wish to tell us about? Yes, Councillor Salmon.
Thank you. Our apologies for not getting here in time to ask you this before the meeting, but I have a potential declaration of interest about item 6 in relation to the discussion around the dedicated schools grant high needs block. What I have an interest in that specific element of the budget, and so I just want to know whether what I need to do, if anything. Do I need to say I can't participate in any discussion on that aspect?
Sorry, we don't believe there is any need for you to declare that interest. We're reviewing the outturn of Q1. I don't believe that has any personal issues regarding yourself and your own position, so I think we can allow you to speak on that. Right, thank you. Okay, confirmation of minutes, and this seems a long time ago. Can I seek your assent to the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July? And does anybody have any amendments they wish to make to them? No, okay, we'll take those as read, thank you. Agenda item 5, public issues. Do we have any public issues
No public issues for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, which brings us to agenda item 6, the council budget monitoring 24-25 at Q1. Okay, an interesting report. I won't say too much about it, but I think probably Mr. Richards, is this something that you're going to introduce? Sorry, we have a portfolio holder here.
Online.
Oh, okay. I beg your pardon, Councillor Cox. Oh. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I welcome this report, which sets out the first quarter of the year. As you can see from the report, clearly sets out that the fact that we've got £38 million worth of savings and efficiencies, which we need to deliver in this year, 24-25. And that comes, I'd remind everybody, on top of the 34 million, which we had to deliver last year in 23-24. If you look at paragraph 7, you'll see that if you do the maths, that in terms of the optimism bias contingency, we've already used up 54% in the first quarter. And that clearly demonstrates the fact that we did need that contingency when we set the budget originally in February. And what a good job it was, really, that we did have it and that we didn't spend it like some people in the council wished we would. In respect of table 1, I think that sets out the variances in the first quarter, and it does do so in a slightly more, in my opinion, transparent way. We have tried to break these variances down into separate compartments, which I think I'm hoping will be useful for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But if I just summarise a few of them. The children's services, unfortunately, has yet again proved financially challenging, particularly regarding recording undelivered savings and underlying negative variances in this first quarter. In terms of well-being, they've delivered savings. These have been matched. They've had undelivered savings, I beg your pardon, but these have been matched by underlying positive variances in the year. In the quarter. In terms of operations, there's been an increase in transaction costs, which has led to the variance in the car parking net income, which is a worrying trend at the moment. But I'm assured that mitigation is being undertaken and worked on at the moment. In terms of the, it's not quite hidden, but it's quite clearly there, is that the loss, it's interesting that the loss of interest on the cash balances is now calculated to be £1 million negative variance. It just shows you that the effect that the deficit on the DSG grant is having on the council as a whole, insofar as that we're, rather than having £1 million extra to spend on services which we would like to, we are short of £1 million because of this built-up deficit. I'm afraid all of this really pales into insignificance when you look at the DSG grant and the deficit which we are piling up on paragraph 22. Unfortunately, success in dealing with the EHCPs has created well, not exactly a financial black hole, but a very large deficit, which we have, at the moment is showing a significant increase on what we budgeted for. And that's why we've asked in our recommendations, we've asked for the Director of Children's Services to produce a report, which setting out mitigating actions which we can take. You can see in the report that we are trying every effort to make sure we can solve the problem of the DSG grant. This can only be solved nationally. It's just not within our remit to solve this. And we have called on the departments of formerly known as DLUP, and DFE to solve this. We've had meetings with them the officials. We've had meetings with the new MPs of BCP and urged them to do as much as they can politically. But at the moment, we're still sitting in the waiting room, effectively waiting for some decisions to be made. Having said all that, I'll leave it open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll open that up. Questions? Anybody want to? Kate, thank you. Councillor Salmon, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I just Councillor Cox did just briefly touch on it, but I did want to ask if there was any more information about the overspending car parking, because it does seem quite significant. Just to understand, I think in the appendix it refers to the cost of collection charges. I'd like to understand a little bit more what that means.
Sure. Effectively, it's transaction charges by credit card companies, and these have been well, these are a lot more than budgeted, and so we're looking into why they're a lot more than budgeted, but also looking to A, reduce them, and B, mitigate them. But essentially, that's what it is.
Thank you. I slightly assumed that, but I didn't want to assume. So is that to do with the move away from using cash to card payments then?
Sadly, no. Otherwise, we'd go straight back to cash. But no, it's the cash transactions would be far more would be a lot more expensive. But it's not to do with the movement away from cash. No.
Councillor Board, before I come to you, Councillor Boardhead, I'd just like to follow up because it's related to the question myself and that, Councillor Cox. I noticed that the number of the amount of money received per transaction has increased. The parking charges have gone up,
yeah.
But we've noticed the number of people using the car parks has reduced. Now that could be down to a number of factors, but it is a significant effect on the revenue that was forecast. I know weather obviously has a big factor in that, but is it possible that our parking charges have now got to the point where it's actually stopping people from coming to the town and using the car parks?
I don't believe so, but you know, I'm open to see evidence that it does do that. But it is constantly being reviewed, and we are certainly reviewing individual cases of car parking charges, and particularly where, you know, there is different time scales. You know, a minimum 2 hours, for instance, is being looked at the moment to see if that can be reduced. But there are a number of ways in which we can change the car parking charges without affecting the overall charge, and that's what we're looking at the moment. Obviously, you know, we want to see the town centres thrive as much as anybody, but I don't believe the car parking revenue has gone down. It's certainly not, but it's open to be reviewed.
I thought it had gone down, even though that the number of transactions per transaction, the amount raised had increased. But we won't get into a debate about that. But I mean, anecdotally, I'm hearing, for example, that people are stopping using the pavilion car or the central car park because the cost of parking there during a show is now just prohibitive. It's just a point. I think we do need to look at what the parking charges and what effect they have got on people using the town centre car parks. Councillor Broadhead, and then the Chief Executive wants to come in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The point I was going to make was very, very similar, actually, Chair, in that there's always been a concern about what we've termed the elasticity of car parking charges, the tipping point, if you like. I think, you know, there's always been a criticism that for too long car parking has just been easy money, in terms of the council kind of putting charges up to collect to earn ever more money. But of course, as we know, there is always a tipping point, as you've said, where people will just stop using the car park altogether and income goes down. I'd read the report and actually had heard some other evidence in the same way, that it looks in many instances that we have reached the tipping point and that people are being put off completely from parking and therefore income might well be going down. I think we've heard from the portfolio holder that he's open to looking at the evidence, but I would suggest that this is clearly in the public interest. It's one of the things that people on the street talk to me most about, is the cost of car parking charges. And I would say it'd be one that I think the Scrutiny Committee should look at some point. Let's take a long, hard look at our strategy on car parking to make sure that not only is it fit for purpose, but it's actually raising money rather than losing money. Thank you.
Okay, what I think we'll do, Councillor Broadhead, is actually take that as an action to consider for our forward working plan, if that's all right. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments. One is that when we've looked at this internally amongst the officers, we had said it's probably too early to take a view on the year as a whole in terms of the overall outturn. It's after the first quarter, so we are trying to forecast the rest of the year off the first 3 months. There are a number of factors in play here, and the weather clearly was not good during April, May and June. It was very wet, and we don't know what that impact was. Part of the challenge for us on the budgets, we now have the new finance system in place. What we haven't got is sculpted budgets. So we've got a flatline budget. We haven't yet been able to sculpt them to say which of the months when we normally see demand. And of course, for things like car parking, Easter, which can fall in either financial year, can make a real difference to the first quarter's forecast. So I think those points are worth considering. We are looking at those, and that's why we're hesitating to forecast a year-end difference on car parking. I think the other point to make, which I think all members are aware of, we have been campaigning with government for some time now. We've reopened the campaign with the new government because car parking fines are now at the level very similar to the level that we charge for a full day in the car parks. So the level 2 car parking fine is £50, £25 if you pay it within 14 days. And the top level is £35 or £70 if you don't pay it within 14 days. So there is a national view looking at the level of car parking, fines for parking illegally. And we are getting to the point where our car parking charges are not dissimilar. In London, where car parking charges are high, the fines are much higher as well. So we are looking at that as an example to see whether that is a deterrent effect. We are getting more and more complaints about illegal car parking. And as you know, we issued well over 1,000 tickets during one weekend. And that's not good for anybody because it does mean that cars are parking illegally. So there's a number of factors in there. We'll be looking at those. Glyn, your Chief Operations Officer, is doing an in-depth view on car parking and the sculpting of the budget as well.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Councillor Northover, thank you.
I just have some questions on under wellbeing. It's points 21, 22 and 23. I see that we're looking at reducing agency workers, which is something has been always there as far as I know. And so I just wondered how realistic this point is to, I think it says the responsible director has a clear brief to lower these costs at pace, but we know that if they could have been, they would have been, I'm sure. So I just wondered, have we thought of something we've never thought of before, or will, can that be realistically reduced? And then also on at point 23, there's a comment about commissioning services for children in care, and I just wondered who assesses a placement if a child's been put in a placement, at what level is that reviewed to see to think again about the cost and everything? Is that just the social worker, or is it looked at a much higher level? Because I know some of them are very expensive, and I've heard of people working in places where they don't think that there is actually that much oversight for quite a large amount of spend. So I just wondered how we look at that.
Councillor Cox, is that for you, or is that for
I think it's probably more of a detailed question for the directors concerned. I think Kathy is online, so she can certainly answer the children's services question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. We do have what's called gateway meetings where we look at the high cost placements. We do have a commissioning review which is going on in terms of those placements, especially also those with our health partners. and we look at our contractual arrangements and currently looking at, is there more that we can do in terms of those contractual arrangements to drive down costs?
There was
Yeah,
another
please.
part
Yeah.
to the first part
Yeah,
of the
please.
question as
Yeah.
well.
Okay, could you just
Shall I
repeat
repeat
it?
it?
Yeah, please. Thanks. Yeah.
It was just about the cost of agency staff, which on points number 21 and 22, we're talking about putting pressure to lower the cost of agency staff, but we've always had that cost and we've always been trying to do that. So I'm wondering if this is realistic that we're going to now be able to reduce it when we have been doing that for at least 5 years. It's been a top thing to reduce the use of agency staff. So I'm wondering what's changed to make that a realistic reduction in cost.
Kathy Headley, is that something you can answer? Thank you.
Speak for children's, I can't speak for wellbeing, but so if the question is regarding children's agency staff, we have done a very significant
Yes.
recruitment campaign, and we have reduced our agency staff from 70% agency and 30% permanent. We have changed that significantly round to 30% agency and 70% permanent staff. We continue to do that work. There are particular challenges in particular areas of the service, which we find challenges around permanency, but we are continuing to work with agencies such as community care to develop those and strengthen our recruitment in that. There's also a real clear support from council and from the chief executive in terms of our remuneration for social workers in children's, particularly in enabling us to support that agenda.
Okay, Councillor Rice, please.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, I had rant because my question was about asking an officer to speak about the parking, which Graham Farrant did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Canavan, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to ask this question. It's really in relation to paragraph 5, where it talks about reducing the adult social care budget by 5.1 million. I just wondered if somebody could explain the kind of time frame behind that, you know, as to when it's going to go through Cabinet, when it's going to go through Council, because it hasn't been discussed by the Health and Adult Social Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee at all yet. We have got dates and diaries and so on for looking at the budget, but I'd rather not have a situation where somebody just decides to take that amount of money out of the budget before we get the opportunity to actually have a look at the budget in more detail. So if somebody could clarify that for me, I would be most grateful. Thank you.
I think this is the environment that's being discussed in the paper. Mr. Richards, would you like to respond? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, section 5 refers to a proposed environment and a really straightforward one between adult social care and children's social care. The sum involved is £5.1 million. The proposal report is clearly going to Cabinet on the 4th of September, and then it goes on to the next council thereafter for consideration. But in essence, what it's doing is, first of all, it's looking at the financial outturn for last year, which you'll remember was something that was scrutinised by this committee last time it met. And in that, we found in that final quarter, there was a significant underspend on adult social care because they realised they budgeted for costs to do with learning disability and mental health that they didn't need to budget for. And not only did they do that last year, 23-24, but that was an ongoing error, if you like, as part of that process. So ordinarily, that would give us £5.1 million on an ongoing basis that we weren't anticipating. The proposal in the report, however, is to transfer that to children's social care, because what we've seen is ongoing relentless demand for children social care costs and the number of children social care both in the system and costs related to them. So it's a straightforward, if you like, a budget adjustment to correct those two issues and put us back on an even keel, if you like. But it's clearly something that will be considered by Cabinet and then go on to Council for full consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richardson. Presumably, Councillor Caravan, I'll give you the opportunity to discuss it with your adults and health overview and scrutiny committee at some point. Are you still with us, Councillor Caravan?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Chair.
thank you.
Very great.
You're okay with that, are you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Aiken.
Yeah, I did. On, that's on now. Yeah. I just wanted to really just ask a general question, particularly because it was just mentioned there that about putting us back on an even keel. Just reading table 1, it looks like our projected outturn is actually less. It's actually more than it should be. So is that actually an even keel, and are we spending more than we've got? And can you just briefly say where that money is going to come from, or if I'm reading the table a bit wrongly?
I think it's one for Mr. Richards. Thank you.
And I think it clearly demonstrates I probably need to think about some of the phrases I use, because I think my reference to an even keel was, there is no impact on the services delivered by adult social care, in that sense, no impact at all. We just budgeted for amount, and there was, if you like, an error in that budgeting with regards to the overall assessment of the cost. That's led to a saving, but at the same time, we're able to address the most significant pressure we were facing, which is that relentless demand for children's social care costs. So from those two issues, it puts us on an even keel. But the member's quite right. Table 1 identifies that we are forecasting an overspend of £3.1 million, but that is a forecast based at Q1. And a number of members will be through this cycle before, because what we do is we identify that forecast, but then we look to the budget holders, the corporate directors, service directors, and the heads of service to rally around and identify mitigations that will bring that back within the budget by the time we end the financial year. It is something as part of the process, it's something we're well versed in, and if we look back over the last couple of years, it's something that we've clearly been able to demonstrate that proactive financial management and managed to keep us in line with those original parameters. So I would anticipate actually that collective effort hopefully will achieve bringing that £3.1 million back into balance. But I think, as the portfolio holder highlighted earlier, the clear elephant in the room is where we are with regards to the dedicated schools grant and the high needs block, because I don't think anything we will do will bring that one around.
That's the Broadhead.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. First one, very quick, and it's related to the point we've just been discussing about getting a handle on the actual figures we're talking about here. And I completely understand the issue with the dedicated school grant and the fact that these figures are small fry in relation to that. And of course, that's an issue of some import, which is related but not directly responsible for some of the figures we see in front of us. So the way I read number 6 and 7 on the report is that we're currently projecting an overspend of 3.6 million, and that is after, according to number 7, already releasing 4.3 million of the optimism buyers contingency. So I think my simple question is, as it stands at the moment, that's £8 million, so 100,000 short. So are we in a position where in the first 4 months of this year we are £8 million overspent, regardless of the fact that we hope to claw it back? It's a simple question, but is it £8 million? Or am I reading that wrong?
Mr. Richards.
What I would highlight is the fact that, in presenting the overall position, we've actually set aside, if you like, a specific contingency that was set aside as part of the budget to manage that optimism bias in the savings, because we knew in setting the biggest level of savings we've ever set as a council, £38 million, there was going to be an element of challenges of that. The first quarter's budget monitoring indicates that we might not deliver £4.762 million of that, and the proposal is to set aside £4.3 million from that optimism bias, which was over £5 million that we set aside as part of that budget, to bring us back down to that 3.1 million. So I think in response to the question, I think it depends on, you know, which end of the telescope you're looking at. Now, I'm certainly looking at the £3.1 million is the current forecast. And then, as I said, hopefully the mitigations the officers will put in place will bring that back in line with those original parameters set within the budget.
Can I just add that in terms of the undelivered savings, these effectively represent they're not being, they will be delivered eventually. They're just being slow in being delivered because you know, some of these savings take time to get into place. So, for instance, there may be a saving which we've assumed from the 1st of April, which actually is not going to be delivered until halfway through the year. And that's you know, and that results in an undelivered saving variance there, and we've netted off against as the Director of Finance has said, against this optimism bias. But these savings will, in a vast majority of cases, be delivered. They'll just be delivered late.
Councillor Broadhead.
I thought it was going to be a shorter answer than that, but I think what I heard was, yes, at the moment it's 8 million, but we're confident it will be down to 3.1 million as things stand, and then hopefully as the year goes on, the rest of it will be dealt with. You know, we've had successive years, of course, of bringing budgets in balance, and this is always an iterative process. But I think it is slightly misleading to say that you've put aside £4.3 million of a contingency for savings that you hope will materialise throughout the course of the year, and then almost not worry about it. But I think I'll move on to the second question, if I may, Chair.
Before you do, Mr. Richardson and the Chief Exec, please.
I suppose my response would be just to really emphasise that contingency was part of the budget. That was something that we scrutinised at depth within this meeting, and in clearly being a fundamental part of that budget, I would come to a slightly different conclusion than the councillor.
Chief Exec?
Yeah, what Adam said, but absolutely it was in the budget, and therefore I don't agree that it would be an £8 million overspend at the moment, because the contingency is in the budget approved to be spent by the council.
Can I just throw a view into this? And I had a similar concern that the Councillor Broadhead did in the rate at which the contingency has been used. But Councillor Cox has just explained that some of these savings are coming through, but at a later period. But it depends on the degree of confidence that you have in monitoring that process. And having seen some of the predicted overspends, particularly in children's services, that does give me some cause for concern. And we'll probably talk about children's services a bit more, I suspect, later in the meeting. You know, when you see some of the really, you know, big increases in the provision of children's services, it is a little worrying. But our officers have got confidence by the sound of it. So go ahead and ask your next question, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you. And it neatly segues on to just talking about the optimism bias contingency, which is, yeah, the officers are absolutely right. It's within the budget. And therefore I'm not picking a fight. I think it's completely appropriate to say we put aside a contingency, we've used it. I do think you then recognise that you've used it, and I suppose one could argue that if that optimism bias contingency wasn't there, we'd probably be reporting as yet undelivered savings on time, rather than we've just used a bit of the optimism bias contingency. But I just wanted to ask portfolio holder a question on it, really. When we had the big discussion about the kind of ideology, if you like, of the optimism bias in the budget, one of the councillors in the room, who's actually sat next to me, if I remember, I think it was you, John, had criticise the concept of having that contingency, because the problem with having named contingencies with a pile of money next to it is that the temptation is to call on it very quickly rather than kind of get stuck in with some immediacy and deal with the problem. It looks here to an objective observer that Councillor Beasley in many ways was right, because we, in 4 months, as Councillor Cox said at the beginning, we've gone through what, 40 to 50% of that contingency. I mean, I think I know what the answer would be, but Councillor Cox, what do you regret putting that contingency in place? Do you think that if that contingency hadn't been there available, there might have been a chance that maybe there was a little bit more adherence to the savings plans?
Councillor Cox?
I can safely say I don't regret it at all, and I think Councillor Beasley was entirely wrong in his view on this subject, because what we've done is set a challenging target for the council to be sustainable in the long term, and that's where this administration differs so much from the previous administration, insofar as we wanted to set a sustainable budget for this council so that it could balance its books for not just for this year but for the long term, and that meant setting very challenging targets. Those challenging targets were, as the Director of Finance has already said, is the biggest in the council's history, and we knew they were challenging, and there's nothing wrong with setting challenging targets. But anybody with any prudence would set aside a contingency just in case we weren't able to deliver that. And that contingency which we set aside has proved to be useful, not proved to be essential in making sure that we can balance the books at the end of the year. Those savings, will by and large be delivered, but they just take time to be delivered. So I would say that the way we have prepared the budget, the way we are monitoring the budget, is entirely correct. And unfortunately, I believe Councillor Beasley's view on this is entirely wrong.
Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes, I just feel that I'd like to come in on some of this, because I think that we have a really important responsibility as a scrutiny committee to be scrutinising not just the figures of the budget but how things are being done. And I'm getting the feeling that we're giving the impression that this committee is against the idea of contingency, and I think it is really important that when you have risk, you balance this with contingency. And so I, rather than criticising the idea of putting contingency in budget, would like to really say that I think this was something that we did well, something that we should have done. And that my understanding after listening to the officers of how these figures are presented and how it works is actually the opposite way round to how Councillor Broadhead was saying it, that I understood that the contingency money, that we have spent that, but it's okay to spend it because it was part of the budget. We've spent that, and it's actually the 3.1 million that we may not end up spending, because that's a projection, and if we do some further work to get savings, we may be able to get that down to nothing, in which case our budget will balance. So my understanding is, I'm not saying that that's all how it's going to happen, that our vision for this, what is being presented here, is that we've spent some money that we very sensibly put aside in case we needed it, and we found now that we did need it. We need to keep a serious eye on things to make sure that we don't continue to need even more of it, so that we go over the amount that there is. But the amount that's there, that's what contingency is there for, to be very sensibly saying that, yes, we want to make savings, but some of these savings may not happen from day one, and therefore we need some contingency for that gap in between. So I think that that's a really sensible way to do things. And I think that as scrutinising that, we should recognise that contingency, where there is risk, is a good idea.
Thank you. Okay. Right, for a moment. I've actually got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. some have already been touched on. Yes, in paragraph 13, it talks about the delayed voluntary redundancy process at the end of the last financial year has meant some transformation savings cannot be fully realised this year due to staff notice periods. Well, I don't understand. I mean, we can't have many staff on notice periods in excess of a year. I know there's obviously a lead-in period, but could someone explain to me why we can't accommodate those notice periods within the current financial year?
So, Chair, so just to give you an example, say employee A, we gave them notice on the 1st of April. They work their notice period, they get paid during the notice period. You know, actually they stop working for us from the 1st of July onwards. But what we get is 9 months saving in their post rather than a 12-month saving in their post. So therefore, that's where that, voluntary redundancy period and notice period all comes into play.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. In paragraph 15, there are a number of reasons given about the costs in children's services, and maybe Kathy Hadley can answer this one. But it does say that there was a delay in the implementation and mobilisation, which is the improvements that have been agreed by Cabinet. But because we have an Ofsted inspection coming along, this is going to delay the mobilisation improvements, and therefore our cost savings are not going to be, made as programmed. I think we knew that Ofsted were going to come along and inspect us again. Was that not planned for? Also, the delay to pay and grading systems causing a delay to the new service delivery. I don't understand why. Why has that been delayed? Because we knew the pay and grading system was coming on. Why should a delay in that, drive the cost? And also the overall rising cost of care. Is that not allowed in an inflationary allowance made in the budgeting process? So, it shouldn't be a surprise that we've got increasing cost of care, or is it increasing at a rate that is above what we thought it was going to be? Is that the answer? But there are a number of reasons given there. I wonder if Kathy could give us some reasonings on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the transformation of the new service delivery model and the aspects of when Ofsted were coming, we had wanted to deliver the whole of the new service delivery model by the 1st of October, thinking that we would have an Ofsted visit around the spring of 2025. We've had indications, although Ofsted do not tell us when they're coming, but to come within the annual process of when their 3-year annual process of when they would re-evaluate our Ofsted rating, they should really become within 2024. And so we are anticipating that they will come somewhere in the autumn and winter. In consideration of this, we do not want to jeopardise performance as we head into an Ofsted inspection. And so it was felt prudent to hold the new service delivery model or parts of the new service delivery model until the spring next year, early 2025. Alongside this, some of the work around pay and reward when it was being delivered, there will be some challenges for our staff if we move them into different posts about what they would be paid, because obviously there would be a difference from where they are now to pay and reward, and so needing to do it in conjunction with that activity. So that's with regard to the new service delivery model. We have delivered some significant savings in our early help transformation work, and that has been delivered. With regard to the cost of care, unfortunately, demand outstrips supply. So in the main, there are contractual arrangements where we do have very clear percentage increases in terms of cost of living rises, etc. However, what we have now is sometimes the demand is such that the providers will seek to put their costs up quite considerably because of the demand outstripping supply. Having said that, we are working very hard with our contractors, those we contract with, but also those that we have placements with, to seek to reduce those. This is a national issue, not just one for BCP. The Competitions Market Association did some work around this in terms of the profiteering of some of our providers, and seeking for the government to do something substantial in terms of driving down those costs. We are working with our regional colleagues in the Southwest to look at whether there are ways of us working together regionally to drive costs down by weight and number of placements.
Thank you very much for that. In paragraph 24 of the report, the DSG, good old DSG, I mean, what we're being told here is really scary, frankly. Yeah, the budget deficit has now increased by 57%. Absolutely huge. You know, it's really difficult to understand why it would increase at that rate over such a short period. Can anybody explain that? Mike, is that anything you can explain?
I think I mentioned it in my discussion at the beginning, insofar as that we have, you know, Kathy and her department have been very successful in turning around the delivery of the EHCPs, you know, from a extremely low position to an extremely creditable position nationally. That has led to more EHCPs being delivered, and therefore the costs of delivering those plans has increased, and that is I believe that is one of the reasons that this funding gap has gone up so much in that time.
Just before
Kathy might tell me something different.
Before I ask Kathy to come in, I mean, at paragraph 27, it talks about that, and it's talking about not catching up plans, but new plans, 70 against the forecast number of 30 new plans a month. So, yeah, you know, I had to ask, that's 130% more being carried out than what was planned for. Now, you know, what's happened there? What's generated that increase? Because it doesn't seem like it's catching up, or is it? You know, am I misreading the information? It looks like it's new cases.
I think if you remember a year ago, the amount of EHCPs that we were delivering on time was 0% in terms of the national position. I believe, Kathy can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're now above 75%. So, you know, we've completely transformed the way these plans are delivered, and so that, you know, that success has unfortunately produced this hole in terms of the SG, which I think we've talked a lot about. But Kathy can correct me if I'm wrong.
No. Thank you, Councillor Cox, and thank you, Chair. We predicted and forecasted in the DSG plan around, as Councillor Cox set out, 30 plans, and we've had an unprecedented demand from our schools, particularly around the last two terms, that have been more than we anticipated. Now, again, as has already been said, this isn't just a local issue, this is also a national issue. The need and profile of the children that we are actually working with has also slightly changed, and so that also have an impact on the placements that we would want those children to have. And we're looking at this in terms of making some inquiries about what this is about to understand it, so we can readjust the DSG plan. I will bring Sharon in a minute, the Director of Education, but we've always stated that we will meet the statutory need and the timeliness, and we have absolutely done that. But because of this unprecedented increase in demand in this academic year, we've really had to redirect our resources to adhere to this and to achieve that. And so this has created some of the delays in terms of some of the activities that we have set out in the DSG plan, and to reduce spend. We do have a lot of scrutiny around our spend. We have the DFE sector-led improvement partner at all our decision panels, scrutinising our placement identification, the spend of that placement and the validation and the expenditure. So there is work in that area. But we have been successful in some areas of reducing costs quite significantly. And I don't know, Sharon, if you want to come in on those areas.
Thanks, Kathy. Yes, so the DSG action plan has a number of preventative areas in order to change the profile of activity. We have, as you know, and I think that's reported before, a high level historically of use of independent specialist placements for children with SEND plans, and that drives a considerable higher cost than that in local schools. So we have been working over the last, really since January, with schools to identify cohorts of children that we can locate and support in mainstream provision, meeting their specialist need, but within mainstream provision. That clearly takes time, so we need to understand every child's plan and make sure we get the grouping and configuration of those children right, so the schools can appropriately support them, but also that we can meet children's needs. So to date, we have been able to find cohorts of children. 17 new children are accessing specialist provision in mainstream settings at a much lower unit cost than it would have been in the private market. So we are beginning to see that change happen. As Kathy said, we've had two key aspects really. We had the backlog of children who we needed to assess their plans and meet their need. And we've worked very closely with our Bedford SLIP partner, sector-led improvement partner, to make sure that we're making the right decisions and the right costed band profile for those children. That process and that work, so we had hundreds of children we need to move through and look at their plans, look at their need. That profile of expenditure for those children changed slightly. At the same time that happened, we also saw a significant increase in demand from schools. That's both for the use of alternative provision, but also new plans. So to give an idea of that, we are tracking every new plan every month. But in July, we had a significant increase, again, way above and beyond the 30 that was in the plan. We are looking at every new assessment for children, and what we can see is a change in their need pattern. So this time last year, the majority of the plans that we were seeing for assessments was for ASD condition. We're now seeing a much greater need for children with social, emotional, mental health support requirements post-COVID under the setting. So we are seeing an absolute change in the level of need in the system compared to the data that we had last October. Notwithstanding that, we are looking at and we have implemented new intervention services to get to need earlier to support children. So this year we did introduce Dingley's Promise, which is in the improvement plan. We are now supporting 101 early years aged children to try and support them into mainstream provision and reduce the use of specialist placements. So work is underway, but as Kathy said, because we've seen a significant increase in new assessments, we've had to meet the need of those children because we committed to no statutory delays for children during that period of time. The other area of work that we talked about in the DSG action plan was around the post-16 provision, where we can see historically we've had a much higher use of independent specialist placements. We're a little late to getting to that piece of work in order to meet the statutory demand. We have a programme for that starts this week looking at our children who are post-16, and we've started conversations with local colleges to see what we can do from September onwards to better support, keep our children local in mainstream provision. So there is more that we need to do. Finally, with the adjustments that we've seen in the system, Kathy, myself and other colleagues are working through what that means for us now, what the plan needs to look like going forward, and indeed what a forecast may be for the DSG going forward. Lastly, just to say, and I know that Kathy's mentioned it, we are tracking our rate of entrance against our South West colleagues, our Bedford sector-led improvement partner, and we can see that we're following the national average. So this isn't unique to BCP, but clearly it has a significant budgetary pressure.
Thank you. I mean, the burning question here in fact, I've got a couple of burning questions on this. The first is, have you any idea why we've got such a huge increase coming along? And two, and whilst this might seem a bit off the wall, but if the DSG deficit is going to bring this council to a situation where it's got to submit a section 114 notice, the alternative, would it not be to actually say, actually enough is enough? We can't spend any more money on this service because we haven't got the money. And the third element of that is, what is the actual additional revenue cost of this increase in the DSG? Because I know that last time we asked this question, it was £4 million to cash flow this particular item. This is a 57% increase in that difference. So are we going to see a corresponding increase in the amount of cost to the council because of this? Because, at a stroke, you're looking at a huge increase in our overspend. So I know there's three really broad questions there. What is it that's causing this sudden escalation of DSG needs? And perhaps Adam Richins could talk about the cost to the council, and actually what's the legal effect of actually saying, hang on, enough is enough. We haven't got enough money to pay for this. We've got to stop it. Let's bring this to a head. And so what happens if we do that?
In terms of the demand, then I'll bring Kathy in. In terms of, we have been working very closely with schools. We've had a number of sessions. We had an education conference on the 27th of June where we had nearly all of our schools attend that to talk around our vulnerable learners, how we support our vulnerable learners, what can we do to change the system. We've had a number of workshops to identify with schools, how can we support children sooner, earlier, so that they don't result in needing an assessment. And we have discussed the idea of an innovation programme, which has a number of initiatives in place to try to reduce demand. And we have co-produced that with schools, and we're willing and able to talk to schools about that again in the September term. As I've said, it is a national issue and one that we seek to work with other colleagues around that. I'll pass over to Kathy around the statutory question.
Thank you, Kathy.
The statutory question. No, thank you, Chair. The question around the reason for the demand, we can go back to 2014 reforms from the government that set out new reforms aged up to 25 without any extra funding to local authorities to start with. I think we also can look at, and quite rightly so, in terms of parental preference. And so how does one suffice the parental preference against the financial abilities within a council? And I think there's also an issue around, how do we support our schools to be inclusive, and how do we support our schools to be inclusive against a backdrop of an inspection process for schools which doesn't seek to support that inclusivity. So I think there are a multitude of reasons why we have increasing numbers and happening nationally. There's an Ipsos report out at the moment which quite clearly sets out that the SEND structures, the SEND system does not support anybody. It does not work for anybody, and it's a real challenge. In terms of what do we do with if we just said that's it, we're not going to do any more, we will not be meeting our statutory responsibility. We have an CQC and Ofsted inspection probably in the spring around SEND, and we would fail it. And so there would be a reputational issue regarding the council, but also we would be letting down all the children and parents and carers of those children who have SEND needs.
Thank you. Mr. Rich, could you answer the question about the cost, the additional cost?
Thank you, Chair. And just to highlight, separate with regards to this report, we've got a recommendation C, which is that the 2nd of October Cabinet receive a separate report on the dedicated schools grant, goes into the details around the drivers for that expenditure forecast and sets out very clearly for members' consideration what mitigations can be put in place to ensure that we manage that cost. Because as you quite rightly point out, we're incurring £44 million over budget on a £61 million budget. So that's 2/3 overspent, which is absolutely eye-watering in that regard. With regards to the actual cost, that is, it's not as easy as saying it's that or it's this. Previously we said that, when we were forecasting to be overspent, I think by £28 million, we said it was likely to be costing this council in a tune of £4 million, per annum. And you're quite right. It will lead to additional costs and overspend. At this moment in time, that is part of that £1 million forecast overspend that we're predicting within Treasury Management. It falls within that category, but clearly that will need to be refined as that forecast starts to play out as we go through the course of the year. But it is part of that process. It might also be a good opportunity to highlight that, when I spoke to this committee last time, we highlighted the fact that I'd issued a letter to the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities on the 22nd of May, basically flagging up my concerns about the ability to set a balanced budget for this council for 25-26. Last Wednesday we met with representatives of DFE, supported by representatives of MHCLG, as they are now called. And what they suggested as a way forward is that they've appointed an independent financial advisor to the DFE, a gentleman by the name of Chris West, to actually review the council's financial position and provide them with advice, because I think it's quite clear that they need that independent, detailed knowledge of local government finance to be able to advise them on what options they potentially have in order to advise me on how to meet my statutory duties.
Councillor Waters.
Yeah, so I think from what we've discussed today, it seems like it's the private element of the social care providers that are causing the issues in the sense of the profiteering, the cost of delivering the services. Have we ever worked out how much capital budget we would need to spend in order to bring those services in-house and not have to use these providers?
It's some of that, but not all of that. Part of the original safety valve bid was to ask the Department of Education to support us into new provisions for children with social and emotional mental health and autism spectrum conditions. We were successful in one, not two. So we are seeking, obviously continuing that conversation alongside the financial aspect. So that was part of the original proposal. As I've mentioned, we are working with mainstream schools where we can, considering the falling pupil role, which is more prominent at the moment in the primary sector, hence our ability to identify new places at lower unit cost, and we'll do that again in September with a round of expression of interest again for that. We also will be speaking with secondary MATs and SATs around that as a potential. However, the current pupil demography is that most secondary schools are full, so the capacity to actually create those provisions isn't available right now, but will be in the future. So we're absolutely having conversations about what that would look like, alongside that broader piece of work around that inclusion. So the level of alternative provision use in the local area is high. It's high nationally. And again, speaking with schools in terms of, so how can we prevent the use of AP, which can be a significant unit cost variance in the system. So from a capital point of view, we'll continue to have that conversation with DFE. Clearly, though, that takes time. So the school that we have been successful for, we have looked at how can we best support those children now, but also make the most efficient, cost-effective public education venue for our children in that space. And we'll continue to lobby for additional funds where we can.
Councillor Chan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Isn't the underlying problem in all of this is that even if we were able to, under the current legislation, if we were able to provide what is actually required in-house, the parent has the ability of going to an alternative provider and will win a case to seek to go to an alternative provider, and some of those alternative providers promote themselves quite heavily in various ways. So unless there's a proper root and branch reform in the regulations around it and what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable, we're always going to be in a situation that even if we did get the ability to provide all these specialist services, we could still potentially be in difficulty because these rather expensive providers will continue to draw pupils away from the system.
Yes, that is the case. We try to work with parents and carers, so we will identify a provision that we believe meets need in the example that you've just given. However, the situation is point in time, a parent can disagree with that and argue and advocate for a different provision, and that may ultimately be what we are instructed to deliver against.
Which kind of sums up the underlying problem with all of this. It's not just the finance, but it's also the way that the system's set up, that you know, we can provide the best services in the world, but if someone says that they can provide a better service, you know, sort of that kind of doesn't work in our favour.
Any other members at the moment? Yeah, that's North Overley.
Thank you. I was just interested, if you don't mind me just asking a question about the when you were saying about making savings by having provision in local schools, and I just wondered how many children are we looking at and what kind of savings might we be making?
That's the work that we need to do because the profile of need has changed so considerably. And as I mentioned, we had a significant backlog that we had to work through. And as you know, some of those children and families had been waiting for 12 to 18 months. We are through all of that now. But obviously that gives us a very different picture of changing need than we had in last October. That's what we need to look at, but also considering the complexity of need for those children, their ages and stages, and it is quite detailed work because it can be a cohort of 4 or it could be a cohort of 8. And then also we've been considering the geography of those children, so linked to the homeschool transport aspect. So that's the work that we need to do. It's linked to our SEND sufficiency strategy piece of work, which we are moving through. And I couldn't give you a figure at this point in time, but as instructed by Graham and Adam, that's the work that Kathy and I will be doing to put forward some scenarios about how we can change demand and profile and unit cost wherever possible.
Thank you. Any other members? No, okay. I've got a couple more questions if you don't mind. On Appendix A1, paragraph 17, it talks about the extremely high cost of corporate parenting and permanence. And I know that you know there's going to be a significant variance there. I think the cost at the moment is about £55.5 million per annum. I just can you give us some idea of how many children are actually in care and funded? Who? Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Do you
Kathy.
want to answer
Kathy. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. So I think it's about 157 currently. Sorry,
sorry,
557.
500.
550. Yeah, something around that. You know, children come in and out of the service, but about 557. So we're looking at probably 74 per 10,000 population. We're not far off our statistical neighbours with that figure. And again, we have similar problems in terms of demand outstrips supply, and in terms of some of our providers seeking exorbitant financial reward for placement offers.
So our figures are not unusual. They reflect a national sort of picture, do they? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. One of the things I did pick up in the reports was the funding coming from the NHS. And I can't remember for the life of me where I picked it up, but there seemed to be a couple of lines where the funding is not coming through from the NHS. See if I can find it.
Number 15.
Or is it appendix?
Number 2, table. It's the first bit and it's number 15.
What table?
There.
It's on page 19.
Page 19. Yeah, I did see that there was a table somewhere that actually gives the figures. Yeah. Well, I can't find it in my notes, so, but it was, sorry. Yeah.
Within the savings, you know, the assumptions within children's services was that they would be able to generate an additional £500,000 worth of savings by reviewing, you know, the care packages that are provided to children, and through those negotiations with the NHS, actually obtain a greater contribution. Clearly, you know, what's set out in, I think it's Appendix 3, is that the forecast is that we will not be able to achieve that saving. So that's probably what you're referring to, and you've got representatives of children's services that can go into further detail should you need it.
Okay, I from my memory, I seem to recall that there was a couple of lines and it added up to about £500,000. And I just thought, you know, what was that all about? But okay, thank you. Just the report doesn't cover capital, and I wondered, and I understand why. I wondered, would it be possible for you to issue us a capital report so we can look at that outside, you know, in slower time maybe? Is it possible to issue that?
I think, Chair, through the report, what we do is we make a commitment for including, if you like, getting back to normal in regards to capital as part of Q2. So as part of Q2, you'll have the full capital pack. But as you quite rightly, there are some circumstances meant that we're not able to do it on this occasion.
Okay, well, very final one. An amount of the cost for the regeneration programme is allocated against capital because they're presumably regeneration programmes. And I just wondered, so what confidence do we have that we can recharge those costs to the capital programme, because some of those capital programmes may never come into fruition, and some of those costs are quite high, and we've seen that before. It's where you can't capitalise because the programme doesn't come into fruition, so then the revenue account picks up the responsibility for that. So the question is, what confidence do we have in the capital programme? That's why I've asked the question about the list of capital programmes, to see, you know, it's how many of those are actually going to come online and when, and what the impact will be if they're not realised on the revenue budget.
Chair, thank you for the comment. I think, you know, when we look to provide that update, I think we can see if we can potentially home in on some of those things for you, you know, potentially to help highlight them, so that we can understand, because it is a clear risk. You know, we have been on quite a journey with regards to recharging you know, employee costs particularly, and other costs that we incur to capital. We've recognised, you know, within the section 25 report that we're still doing that to some degree, and that is, you know, that does carry risk. And that's another reason why we need to make sure we hold those contingencies that we spoke about earlier as part of the debate tonight. But certainly when we provide that capital update, we can see whether or not we can potentially home in and isolate those for you, you know, to actually, you know, assess the true extent of that risk.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cox, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I've had my hand up quite a long time, so the points I was trying to make was in an earlier discussion, particularly about the DSG. I appreciate your suggestion that we stop spending on this area in order to protect the council as a whole. And I think the answer that the officer gave was that we would be letting down children, which we would, and that there would be reputational damage, which there would. But I would emphasise the fact that actually a Section 114 notice would do just as far more damage than any of that. So what we need to do is to do something, and do something urgently, not us, but the government. As I've consistently said, this is we can't solve this problem. This is absolutely down to the government. And as the Director of Finance has already pointed out, that they've had meetings with the DFE, and I have to say I was depressed and disappointed with the outcome. Appointing a consultant is not my idea of providing proactive solutions to what effectively is that BCP have identified a problem which no other local authority has identified before. And that stands as great credit to the Director of Finance, that he saw this problem, and he has explained it in tiny detail to the powers that be. And it's only now that they're beginning to figure out that he was right and they were wrong. And so, I think we're in a very difficult situation. I would emphasise that myself and the leader have met all of the new MPs in BCP, and we have consistently, I'm sure they will testify, that we have consistently said that this is the number one issue that faces BCP at the moment, and unless we can get through that, we're in trouble.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cox. And I think, for public record, public needs to be aware that the accumulated deficit is predicted to get to £107 million. And, and the effect that it has on services is significant. We've got these very detailed, low level sort of costs down to the nitty gritty. And this is, if we had another £4 million, a lot of those worries would go away, wouldn't they? So yeah, it's a very difficult, and I take your point entirely about reputational damage of the council effectively going bankrupt and having to bring in a government to manage on our behalf if we can't sort this issue out, or the government can't sort it out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, sorry. Thank you. Please go ahead. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure it was on appendix A1 or A2. Right.
Microphones. I know.
Yeah, appendix A1, page 25, but that's referring to adult social care services. Income from NHS, section 256.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. That's where it was. Yeah. NHS funding, one was 337 and the other was another, I don't know, health funding, income from NHS. Anyway, yeah, I think we've had an answer from that. So yeah, thank you. So anyway, we've done that one to death, I think. But thank you for the report, Mr. Richards. Thank you, Councillor Cox, for presenting it. And good luck with it for the rest of the year, and let's see how it goes. But so thank you. So now we come to agenda item 7, which is a shared vision for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, the utilisation of the performance dashboard. And it looks like our new leader, Councillor Millie Earle, is going to introduce this paper for us. I've already had a sneaky little presentation prior, but I'll let you introduce the paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and hello to the committee from my new role as leader. It's very exciting, but at the same time, I'm suddenly thinking, oh my gosh, all these different things that I need to know about. But this is something which is really useful for that, because any sort of monitoring obviously helps give us a really strategic view of where the council is. What's particularly exciting about this is it's the first iteration of our monitoring. as part of the new corporate strategy, so reflecting those new aims that were adopted in May 2024. I think what's really different about this one, and I was just going to say, as a member of Scrutiny for 4 years in the previous term of the council, budget. Not just budget monitoring, but also, corporate strategy monitoring, any sort of out-term monitoring would come back and around to overview and scrutiny time and time again. And it sort of creates a bit of a narrative, which is really useful to understand where the problems are within the council, but also where we're performing really well as well. So I think it's really worth members getting stuck into this, understanding what tools we have available now, understanding what we are monitoring in terms of our ambitions and the measures, but also thinking about what would be helpful. So what maybe is missing from the monitoring at the moment. I know the report does say about not making it too complicated, too much on it, but if there's something that you as a scrutiny committee feel would be really, really helpful to have in its real-time kind of updated way in which the digital platform works, then there is an opportunity here. So I'm more going to just talk a little bit about the new shared vision and some of those ambitions and what they reflect. And then I think that Isla is going to give a presentation on how to use the new dashboard. So just on my side, we have this vision adopted. We're looking at those targets and the data, making sure that we're aware of any baselines and where we might need to take intervention if there is a problem. You can see throughout the report that we have it's split into our 3 priority areas. So our place and environment, where we have 6 ambitions over 13 measures, our people and communities, which has 7 ambitions with 24 measures, and also our approach and the council's approach priority, which is 16 measures under 7 principles. It includes a RAG rating. I won't go through every single one, as there's quite a lot there, but you're very welcome to ask some questions on those. Obviously, they are quite broad, so I'll do my best in answering them. But the one that obviously sticks out is our single red one, which was about the increase in the percentage of waste diverted from landfill. Well, unfortunately, due to a waste treatment issue, which has now been dealt with by the Environment Agency, we aren't quite meeting that target, but I'm assured that it's now resolved and will be going back up when we come to look at this again. So yes, I'm very happy to take questions on it now, or if you want to go through the dashboard first and then have some questions, whatever you want to do.
I think we probably will wait to the end. And I know Isla's going to give us a short presentation. All I would say, members, is that this isn't the first cut, it's embryonic. And there are 2 aspects of this. Is the actual system of the dashboard itself, how it's presented, what information. And the other is the detailed information that's contained within it. So at the moment, and there's lots of gaps in it at the moment, as you'll see. If you've read it, you'll see a lot of information's not there. But what we're really hoping to achieve tonight is that we look at the dashboard itself, and is it going to serve our purpose of monitoring corporate performance? And so we'll have a further chat about it later on. I hand over to. Sorry, Councillor Rice. Sorry, did you want to come in?
Sorry, no, I put my hand up before you explained the fact that we were going to get a presentation. I'll ask after the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got Director of Marketing, Isla Reynolds, who's going to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Oh, hello, I'm Isla Reynolds. I'm the Director of Marketing, Comms and Policy. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an oversight of how we've got to where we are. But really, this is all about, as the leader and chair has said, we want your feedback. This is our first iteration. This needs to be a useful tool for all of you. And we want to make sure that we keep developing it, keep working on it. So it's not just now to feedback, but in the future, as you get used to using it, as you get used to applying it to your work and your work plan, please let us know how we can, if there's something missing or you'd like to see a different kind of measure, then we'd like to kind of hear that. So this is just a bit of a roadmap of where we are. And again, to reiterate that we are part of a process, and in getting these measures, we've taken measures from existing strategies that have either come through here, have been agreed previously, so they're not made from a blank sheet of paper or plucked out of the air. So those measures have been put into this dashboard and then pulled off the report, and behind that sits a huge amount of data that again we can share with you, but it's like it's a spreadsheet, huge spreadsheet which has lots of different measures that Vicky can show you briefly if we need to. Developing the dashboard is just the first phase. So we're at kind of point 12 now, and then we'll continue to develop that. Something we really want to add into is that benchmarking. At the moment, it's a bit like we are marking our own homework, but we'd like to start benchmarking across our kind of statistical neighbours. So that is absolutely in the works. But again, if you've got feedback, that'd be really useful. Hopefully this will help you to plan your work. I know you've been talking a lot with Lindsay about your work plan looking forward, so you'll be able to use this tool to think about where you might want to do your deep dives or what you might want to scrutinise in the future. So we're in the really early stages of reporting. You might see some grey areas which are pending. Now that's because some of the measures are annual, so we don't always get the measure in the right kind of point to bring you the report, but we're hoping that the whole report will be, or the whole dashboard will be as automated as possible, so it'll be really nice and efficient. It's going to include in the future actions for each ambition and associated focus areas for the narrative to build that story. So that's something we want to put in, and we want this dashboard really to be used rather than static and paper reports going forward, because as soon as we put something to paper, it's out of date. So hopefully you'll had a look on the link that we sent you. You can go and dive in. That is already on the website. We've not shouted about it loads yet because we want your feedback first, but all members will be able to see that, and residents will be able to have a look at that as well, and it's giving you the latest data we have on the day that you look at it. So you'll be able to use that, not wait for a report quarterly, which is already out of date by the time you get it. You've also seen that we've got different views for that. So again, if there's a particular view you want to look at, so I think we're talking about, could we do a view around based on sustainability? Could we do a view on equality? So you might want us to look at a specific view that you see regularly for this committee or for other committees as well. We're going to show you the dashboard. Vicky's going to take you through it. It's not just for this committee, it's for other committees, as well as your own work. It complements the work you've already done in terms of the planning with Lindsay, and it's really part of that transformation journey of making us a really accessible and transparent council, and also making us really efficient because it will be automated. So we've got lots of questions for you. I don't expect feedback tonight. We are available if you want to come and have a conversation with us, or if you want to come and us to do a workshop with you. But really, is there anything we haven't captured? Where are the areas that you might want to challenge and have a look at? And more than anything, how would you like to use this dashboard? How is it useful to you? Are we missing anything? So just to kind of round up before we show you the actual demo, I kind of wanted just to do a shout out to Vicky, who's done loads of work on this, and also our IT team as well. It is an in-house solution. We have made this ourselves. We haven't gone to consultants. We haven't taken anything off the shelf. And it should really speed up that reporting process for us, but also for yourselves. We're not restricted by those rigid reporting timescales of quarterly reports. You can go in at any point. It's available to the public, which I think is great. And we can expand and grow that dashboard to meet your needs. So basically, the question we're asking you is, what do you need it to do? And with that, I'm going to hand over to Vicky, who's going to take you through the dashboard. But hopefully you've had a bit of time to play with it already.
Okay, so this is the dashboard that's available on the website now. Everyone can see it. At the moment, as Ida said, the data is only sorted by the corporate strategy priorities, but there's space down the bottom where you could put extra buttons for different views if you wanted to. So if you click on check out progress by priority, you then get a second screen which shows you how the measures are aligned to each of the priority areas, and you can see at a glance what their RAG status is. If you want more information about a priority, you click underneath. So I'll go to place and environment, and you get to see a dashboard where the measures have been allocated to all the different ambitions as well now. So it's broken down even further. And you can click on an area. So I'll go on to revitalise high streets, click underneath, and then you get to see that you're in the place and environment area. You're looking at revitalised high streets and regenerated key sites. And you've got 3 measures that you can look at. 2 require monitoring and 1 is on target. If you want a closer look, you click on the down arrow by please select a measure, and then you select the measure that you want to look at. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see all the latest data that we've got relating to that measure and a commentary on performance. And on the right-hand side, you'll see data that gives it context, such as why you set that target at that level, how often we collect it, and things like that. If you want to select a different measure, just click on the down arrow again, and then select the next one, sorry. And you can see that all the information has changed. And that's basically it, really. If you want to go back and look at a different screen, you just click back through, click on a different button again, select another measure. I'm sure you use that one. And you can just click through and see how we're doing in each area. And as I've said, as we get more and more information in there, and I put in some back data for this one, you'll be able to see trends and things as well, and compare quarters with quarter. That's basically it.
Thank you very much. And yeah, see the linkage from the vision to the plan to the actual monitoring and of it, and how we can use that data to inform ourselves and any of our overall scrutiny work. So members, yes, Councillor Northoven, thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really great and really useful. There was a couple of the points that I just thought could be made more useful, or I was concerned about. One is about violence and it being conjoined with violence and sexual assaults. Those 2 things being put together, because they're so, like, the way we think about tackling them are so different. And I know that comes from the police, who also don't separate them, but they do if you ask them to. So I don't know why they can't just do that on a continual basis and just keep giving us that information, because I think it's just so important, especially when you're looking at particular areas, to be able to see if there's a rise in sexual assaults in a certain area and a rise in other violent crime in a certain area. I think we just really need to know that. So there was that one. And then also I was looking at antisocial behaviour and how we monitor that, and we're monitoring it by reports to the police. But I wonder if that's the best way, because I know that you can't, it's become suddenly very, very difficult to report antisocial behaviour to the police. So I would be really, I wouldn't trust that figure's right, because it's nearly, if you try to report something now, for the first time ever recently, I had them say, we won't actually take that report. So, you know, if that, and somebody else I know who reports a lot said that she just cannot actually get through the system anymore. If she phones, they say go through the website. If you go through a website, you can't actually get to a conclusion. So I wonder if there's a way of asking, I don't know, maybe ask the public if they were experiencing it, but then that's probably quite an expensive thing to do and uses more resources. So I don't really know what the solution is, but just caution on that one.
I think we'll take both of those away and speak to the service, because I think these are exactly the kind of feedback we want. So let's take it away. I don't have an answer either right now, but we'll come back to you.
Okay, Councillor Walters.
I just want to say this is really good. I work in the software world, and I use a lot of BI analytics tools, and this is pretty good. It's very intuitive. It's relatively quick in the way it works. I was wondering, have you looked at other authorities and what they provide when creating this, and which other authorities did you look at, and what did you learn from them?
I did some best practice research with the LGA, and they had a series of councils that they cited as really good ones to look at. So I went and looked at those and did probably quite heavily base it on one from West Cheshire, because that seemed to look like the best one. So yeah, we did a lot of research to see which was the best way of presenting the data.
had a follow-up question as well. I think, as time goes on and this develops further and further from the looks of the, the squiggly line we had at the beginning, what is there any opportunity at some point to potentially package this and sell it on for an expensive amount to other authorities?
It's funny, we discussed that briefly as well when we were prepping for this. I can't see why not. I think we'd have to take it away and see. It's not my area of expertise, I'm sure, but why not? Let's see what we can do.
Okay, Councillor Broadhead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the risk of this becoming an echo chamber, I agree with my colleagues. I think this is it's a really good piece of kit. I love the fact that it's very, as Councillor Walter said, very intuitive and up to date. It's exactly the kind of thing we need to see. It's and I just think generally the organisation using Power BI more is really positive. I know from for many years, Graham and I in particular have probably been the biggest advocates of Power BI. I think we had the first trials of it a few years ago, but this is quite aside from its use within the organisation. This is great because the public can interact with it, and that it's always very good to be transparent with the public about what you're up to and how you're performing. I suppose the only kind of a bit of point that I've noticed while playing around with it is if this is who is our audience, I suppose. So partly it's us as councillors to be able to keep track and know the right questions to ask. But if it's also being directed at the public, I just think we probably need to think a little bit more around the background for each of the things that we're measuring. And I'll give an example. We are going to talk later on in this session about the actual about the things in the report itself, aren't we? Aside from the just the dashboard itself, because this, there are updates here which I think is worth probing into. But one of the ones, for instance, talks about reducing the numbers of rough sleeping, and when it talks about the reason for the target being where it is, it says the target takes into consideration that it's not possible to reduce the figures at the moment, and therefore would expect to maintain it. Well, I don't think that's the aspiration of the administration, not to try and bring rough sleeping numbers down. So there was a few like that where I think we might just want to put some exposition into why the targets are, a bit more narrative around it all. But I mean, that is just minor points because it's early days and it's an iterative process, and I think it's a really good piece of kit and well done to the whole team.
Yeah, that's great. Councillor Rice, please.
Thank you. Yes, I had 2 points. The first one was just understanding further the aim of the target with regards to waste diverted from landfill in the climate change section. I'm assuming that is to with the assumption that target will assume sort of an improvement to the environment. But then there's discussion about waste being sent to incinerators. And I've raised this before, but burning waste in incinerators causes like the evidence where there are local incinerators demonstrates a reduction in recycling rates, has led to a reduction in recycling rates. And also burning waste is a higher carbon emitter than burning coal. So I just thought that target may need reconsideration, and having a target that focuses on recycling may be more appropriate or useful. And then the other one was with regards to communities. So I would really like to see a measure that relates to wealth equality within our area. So wealth inequality causes a lot of the targets that we're looking at. So reducing wealth inequality would be a useful thing to know that we're achieving. And so I would really, the people that to speak to with regards to an appropriate target would be the Equality Trust. And there is a local group. So I wouldn't be able to suggest a specific measure or know what is measurable, but I would like it to be considered. Thank you.
Sorry, did you want to respond to that? Thank you.
I think we'll just take all these as notes.
Okay,
The
lovely.
service is not here, and I think my point would be these are really useful. And if at any point you look at a deep dive into something, I think it's really useful to also look at how we're measuring it and how it's driving activity. So I think these conversations will go. So we'll take all this away and.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Claire Waite, you've been waiting for ages. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Steve. I haven't really had much chance to have a look at the performance dashboard, so this may be sort of obvious, you've already covered it, but has it been tested for accessibility by the public? I just sort of noticed there's some areas where the contrast isn't very good, or the the text is kind of quite small and sort of quite hard to see. Is it going through an appropriate test group?
That's a really good question, and we're a bit stumped. So can we come back to you on that? I don't think it has yet, but it's a really good point if we need to put it through. Normally everything on the website does need to be. So let us take that one away, I think.
Yeah, I did notice that on the main report it said refer to the exemptions, and then under the exemptions it had a list of a few things, but then there was nothing under I've forgotten the word for it, but there was just sort of a blank space. So yeah, I think it does need looking at.
Thank you, Claire. I think it's worth saying that the reason it's on the website now, it was to give us an opportunity as a board to actually look at it before the meeting, in the knowledge that it wasn't complete, and but it was just to give us an opportunity. But that's a really good point. Yeah, Oliver, thank you.
How much of the data is live data? Is it updated via a kind of a spreadsheet that you upload once a quarter?
It uses something called scorecard. So the data gets entered directly into the scorecard, and then that's updated every day onto the website. So as soon as the data's in there, it will appear on the website.
Is that data manually entered into the scorecard, or does it come from other systems within the council?
At the moment, it's manually entered, but I think there's an ambition to try and get it to suck it all in automatically. So, yeah.
Councillor Borehead, thank you.
Chair, my questions are about the content, the second part of the cabinet paper, which is the actual quarterly performance report data. So if other colleagues want to ask about the first bit, then I'm quite happy to save my questions for the dashboard itself, then the questions afterwards.
I think regarding the actual system, the dashboard itself, I think we would welcome the members to have a look at it online in a bit slower time, and feed those back to the team. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could copy those inputs into democratic services to Claire, so we can collate them, so we understand what's been made. If we need to talk about it, so we understand what's being said, that would be great.
As well.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. So did you what on the specifics? And the specifics?
Yeah, just a few things. I don't know whether.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the actual some of the comments now, are we? They're in there. Is that what you wanted to talk about?
No, I just wanted to.
Oh, okay, on the system itself. Okay.
Yeah, it's about the system itself. Just a few kind of comments, just sort of questions. First of all, I just was noticing some of the targets are things like there's one that says about we want more to make sure we get more fixed penalty notices, and I think my comment's a bit similar to one that's already been made. We have to watch out a little bit for how these statistics are interpreted, because fixed penalty notices could go down because less people are doing things wrong, and so trying to have a target that gets more of them might be something we just have to watch out for. Secondly, I was just wondering about how easy it is to change the things that we are measuring if the council in maybe a few years' time, or even in 4 years' time, decides it has some different priorities. And in terms of the underlying statistics, how much of a problem will it be if we have a new set of priorities, being able to, because if you put a new set of questions in, you'll then be measuring different things. How difficult will it be to change that, both for the IT and also for the using the underlying statistics? I'll ask all my things and then you can come back to them. The third thing is, in fact, I think it's, the last thing I wanted to comment is that targets do drive priorities, and so it's really important that the targets we set are actually going to drive the priorities that we want. So for instance, I noticed you've got some good targets here on planning, saying that we want to make sure that we do a certain percentage of them within a certain time. If you drill down to that, you could then say, but what happens about those if we're trying to get 80-90% done? Those other 10%, well, actually, if we want to meet that target, we need to just leave those other 10% to just take forever and concentrate on the ones to meet the target. And so just to be a little bit careful that our targets aren't encouraging some individuals to be left out, because our target's never going to be 100%, and that maybe to look at having a few more measures in there of things like the satisfaction of services, or perhaps maybe something in there about numbers of complaints, how we handle complaints, but maybe putting that in a little bit carefully, because we don't want to look like everyone's complaining, but just some sort of satisfaction measure to make sure that we're not disadvantaging the 10% of the more difficult cases and picking the low-hanging fruit in order to meet our targets. I don't know if you want to come back on any of those.
I've already deferred some of the technical questions, but I'm going to say something and then my technical experts can contradict me. I think in terms of measures driving priorities, you're right. My understanding is actually a lot of the underlying data would stay the same, data points, but you might look at it through a different lens, or you might kind of, so I think, I don't want to speak for IT, I think Stuart's on anyway, I think we would just look at it through a different lens and could recut the original data, but ultimately the foundations would stay the same. But we can always add new measures in if we need to, and do that. So I think that answers your priorities. You're right, but it's about perspective rather than the data points themselves. The other question was around adding satisfaction. I think you're right. We also have the resident survey, which is kind of it's a bit of a blunt tool in terms of its general satisfaction, but that does pull out things like trust and people's perception of value, the value for money, that kind of thing. So we might be able to pull in some of those, or I know some of those are in the Q1 report itself, but maybe we can highlight that a bit more. Whether we can do it for specific services, I think we need to get back to services and see if they have those kind of things existing, or whether they will put them in place for things like planning or maybe customer service itself. But thank you.
Did you want to say anything, Vicky? No.
I don't know if there's anyone's going to come back on the technical.
Oh, sorry. Who's that? Sorry.
Hello.
Stuart.
Yeah.
Oh, hello,
Hi.
Stuart. Sorry.
Hi, yeah.
I see you lurking there.
Sorry, I'm Stuart Parsons. I'm MI analyst. I'm the developer of the report. Just about the amendments to the report, like if the measures change in the future. Yeah, as it's fully customizable and built in house, and we have a full team of Power BI specialists, like we can make amendments to the report relatively easily. The only question would be the data in the background, like if how that's been stored by the services. Would we be able to like backdate the data to show the historic trend? In some circumstances, we might not be able to do that, so we might have to start at when the measure was created.
So, Councillor Broadhead, then, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So as I mentioned earlier, there's two parts of this cabinet report: the dashboard, which I think we've all got kind of collective agreement, it's a really good thing, and kind of keep up the good work. And then, of course, this is the first quarterly progress report of the actual quarterly performance. So I think it's important that we look at some of the trends within there. And look, I think it's invariable and always a bit of a shame that we tend to focus on the stuff that's not going in the right direction, then it's going in the wrong direction. So you know, credit where all is due. There's a lot in here which does seem to be going in the right direction, so that's that bit done. But I want to focus on just some questions on three of the areas where the trend doesn't look to be going in the right direction. I appreciate the only cabinet member we've got here is the leader, so sorry, but you might just wish to take some of these away to cabinet if you can't answer them. So the first one, if I may, Chair, is on under the area of our place and environment, and it's about footfall across the three towns. And I suppose the first point I would make on the footfall is a a comment. The frequency of these is measured quarterly, and it looks like the target is therefore measured based on the previous quarter, which is, frankly, I think it's just probably the slightly wrong way of comparing where you are in terms of trends on footfall. You probably want to see where you were for a comparative period, i.e. this time last year, rather than the last quarter. So, for instance, in this report, the direction travel looks good because the footfall in summer was greater than it was in spring. Well, it kind of always is, frankly. It would probably be better to compare it to the previous year. So that's more a comment than anything else. The question on this one would be, there's a note in this section in that the funding for data collection of measuring the footfalls is actually not in the council's budget going forward. So I suppose the first question is to the leader, what's your thoughts on that? Do you see the utility of collecting footfall? I think most people would argue that it's very, very useful in terms of monitoring how our high streets are performing. And will you be looking to try and find a way to keep that in next year's budget? That's my first question.
Yeah, how many have you got? Question. You've got 2 more. Okay, all right. Do you want to ask all of them, and then we'll address them in? Yeah, thank you.
So the second one's a very quick one. One of the other points that's going in the wrong direction is the number of non-major planning applications, which, for the kind of uninitiated, is most planning applications. So not the big fancy ones, but the large quantum of planning applications is going in the wrong direction in terms of being determined on time. Now, in the commentary, it says that that's because of clearing the current backlog. But as colleagues will know, we've had a backlog for 4 or 5 years now, which has been concurrently being cleared whilst trying to maintain an increase in good performance. So I suppose, why is that going backwards? And a kind of related point of that is, do we still have the Planning Improvement Board? The Chief Executive and I, a number of years ago, set up a Planning Improvement Board to give a kind of a laser focus on performance of planning application determinations. It was going in the right direction. Now it seems to be going in the wrong direction. So it was, does that Planning Improvement Board still exist, and are we keeping an eye on it? And then the final one was, as I mentioned earlier on, just on the rough sleeping figures. And, it is concerning that the number of rough sleepers across our towns is increasing yet again. Now we've got 63, and it, not to try and make a political point, but when the council changed hands last year, that figure was falling, and it was significantly less than the current figure. So again, what plans are in place to see that figure starting to come down? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I can see in future, this dashboard is going to generate a lot of these sorts of questions. But Leader, do you want to have a go at answering those questions if you're able to? If not, please, we can take them away and then provide a written reply to Councillor Broadhead.
I'll have a go at it. But thank you. I think they're all really good questions. And I would say with things, with all of those areas, I think I've got something to say on them, but probably can elaborate a little bit after finding out some more from officers. So just looking at footfall, for example, when I was portfolio holder for economic development, it was really, really useful in seeing how well we were doing and also how badly we were doing amongst kind of some of our baseline authorities that were very similar, with similar style high streets, seafront areas, those kind of things. But it has been really useful to understand that information. I would agree there is no funding available in the next budget. I think we have to, obviously, the last discussion for an hour and a half around the kind of budget monitoring and some of the pressures that we have, we need to be mindful of what we put back in. However, I think that where we've done really well in our current delivering the budget last year and also currently in this year is looking to where we can bring in those who have an interest in a particular thing, a service, something that the council deliver, and see if there's a way to share out some of that that cost if it is indeed valued by everyone. So I'm very happy to take that away and look at what the cost is and how we can potentially fund it without adding in an additional pressure to the budget. I was just going to add some good news, which for Bournemouth was that footfall is up 7% year on year in June, which when I read that, it's the first time in a long time it's actually been up. So that was really, really positive to read. I'm hoping July will look very similar, but they're really important measures and good to be able to celebrate when we do have a bit of a turn in the tide, and all the work that's going into the town centre is contributing to a higher footfall, and we don't want to lose that as a thing that we can kind of keep an eye on, especially with the town centre, particularly Bournemouth town centre being such a priority, considering some of the challenges that we've had over the last few years. Just looking at Planning Improvement Board, it is very much still in existence, and the reason it is because we do every meeting talk about potentially closing it down, and that is because the backlog is now in a position where it's pretty much all been met. There was one application that was existing on the backlog.
Probably the same one.
My clear ask of officers was that we do not close down Planning Improvement Board until we have dealt with the backlog, and I think actually it's a flexible forum in which we can raise concerns, and if our quarterly monitoring is not looking up to scratch, and I think there is an opportunity to address it within that. What I would say is I've been incredibly impressed with planning's performance. We do as a scrutiny, or you do as a scrutiny board, have regular updates from the head of planning in terms of planning improvement, so you are very welcome to bring that back to look at it a little bit closer. However, just to give you my assurance, until that backlog is entirely dealt with in terms of not having applications over ridiculous amounts of time, then I'll keep it in existence and continue to monitor. And then finally, on rough sleepers, this is probably something I'm going to have to take away. I think you're right in terms of it is quite alarming, and I think what we see around town can sometimes be quite alarming. I know in my district, high streets, it's always quite difficult when you see someone who's experiencing homelessness, and you wonder what we are doing as a council and with our partners to try and tackle it. So I think actually to look in more depth at that question would be really useful. So I'm very happy to take it away and look at what specifically is being done in those areas, and perhaps get a bit more of a thorough response from the portfolio holder for that area. Thank you.
Just before I bring Councillor Beasley in, regarding the Planning Improvement Board, one of the issues was about the integration of the three legacy systems into a new one, and that was part of the planning improvement. Are you able to tell us anything about the progress on that at all? If not, we can. Yeah,
it's still during this calendar year. And I'm just trying to check the details of when. There's been a real challenge with cleaning up the data, particularly historic data, before transferring to the new system. But again, we can circulate an update for that. That is critical to get the planning function working more effectively, so that people can work across the three areas rather than working on one of the three current systems.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, it's been a while, and it's that work has been going on for quite some time. But any members, any more questions? Yes, Councillor.
Sorry, it's the use of plain English. I particularly noticed there was item 14, which may be very petty, but it says a new measure, the percentage of new targeted support episodes where no previous episode had ceased within the previous 12 months, has been introduced to replace the number of families in deprived areas using family hubs. Well, I understood the second one, but I didn't understand the first one. And I just think that if we're going to encourage the public to use it, and the subject was brought up earlier, there are going to be lots of questions, and we need to be very clear that the questions we are there asked are specific, and we can use them. I mean, at the risk of being even more pedantic, there was 5 steps in plain language: is find what they need, understand what they find, and use that information. It was just at that particular item number 14, I thought, I may not be the brightest button in the box, but I hadn't got a clue what that meant.
You're talking about a subject very close to my heart, and also to Vicky's, is trying to make some of these measures plain language and not lose their the kind of specific expertise is really hard, and we are working with services on that, because there are some. I mean, when we first had the first iteration, I had a lot of comments going, I don't understand this, what does this mean? So we're working, it's a work in progress, but if you see anything like that, really welcome that challenge, because we do need to go back to services and make sure that it does work for them in terms of they understand it from their expertise, but also if this is going to be something seen by residents and or just by anybody who wants to scrutinise it who's not an expert, it needs to be plain language. So we will absolutely, that's a useful challenge to have that we can take back. So thank you.
Councillor Beattie, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 areas of questions. Would you like me to deal with them all together, as you did with previous speakers? Well, starting then, if I may, with what reference we have perhaps to other what have been referred to as baseline authorities, but I would say authorities more generally across the country, and whether the questions being asked, whether the measures being identified are similar to those. Have we just sort of cut and pasted those, or have we looked more specifically at the region of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole and made them more specific to us? And the reason I ask that question is because in local government, in my experience, it's very easy to go with the herd. And if you go with the herd, quite often you can have predictable outcomes from that. And I would think that this exercise would be not futile, but of less value if we were to go that route. So I think I'd like the assurance that actually we've done that. And if we're then looking at other authorities, we're comparing, from what I've just said, the measures in the left-hand column, but it's also about the performance and how do we perform by comparison. So if there's a smaller cohort to compare against, obviously that is less helpful. So we need to get a balance in there that will give us information that's useful, because at the end of the day, that's what we're after. This isn't about box ticking, or at least it shouldn't be. It's about what is of use to the authority and what's of use to our residents and our businesses. Those for me are the criteria. So I'd like a bit of assurance about how we've gone about that, appreciating it isn't finished yet and there's more work to do. And there will probably in those cases always be more work to do, but we need to start from a high point if we can. The second question I have, and it's a bit of a recurring theme for me, but it's about engagement from local residents and indeed local businesses, and how straightforward we're making that across the piece. I'm sure we've all experienced the council's website for reporting things that need doing, and that's still got some way to go before it's a totally useful piece of kit, in my opinion. But what it does, and I fear that this may end up being the case with this, it can exclude far too many people. So unless you're online all the time, and unless you do it in your day-to-day work, you're less inclined, I think, to participate unless you can do that in a way that particularly older people have experienced in the past. So the council's trying to move quickly, but residents will move at the pace that they're moving at. They won't change for the sake of the council. So if we're going to get proper engagement across these, we need to be clear. We need to be transparent in the fact that we know we're getting input across all of our residents and businesses, or at least they have the opportunity of doing so without changing the way they work. And I think the third one, Chairman, is about some of the measures that are in here. Some of them are a bit predictable and a bit inward looking, I think, on the basis that we are excluding a number which perhaps residents would be more likely to engage with. And how do I measure that in my own mind? I measure it from what residents and businesses tell me as a ward councillor that they're not happy with, because they rarely come to you to tell you what they are happy with. And that's one of the things that I would challenge within here. It is about what they're not happy with. That makes it more useful to the council and in turn to them. Just 3 quick examples. So we talk in here about street cleaning. That's pretty much the only one I've seen where it is a very basic day-to-day motherhood and apple pie kind of service. But we don't mention lots of other ones which people are always telling me about, and I'm sure that applies to every other member in this room. So, for example, potholes and the state of our roads. You know, we can deceive ourselves that it's getting better, but most motorists might disagree. Graffiti and clean up, both on council property, where there are some absolutely appalling examples, frankly, within 100 yards of this building, and those on private property, because I think most residents have a view on that. And thirdly, the collection of litter and the cleanliness of public places generally. And I think, you know, lots of people will say that, not just about Bournemouth Town Centre, but about lots of other parts of BCP as well. And we're deluding ourselves, Chairman, I think, if we don't address those, because those are the things that people really care about. Those are the things they see every day of their lives, and they're the little things that people want to tell somebody about. And if they're telling us about it, they're maybe not telling everybody else. So that's a good thing, provided we act on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Beasley. You made some really good points there. Councillor Earl wants to come in on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. I think that the first 2 I'll probably leave to Isla to address, because I think they're really good points around using this and making sure we're getting the best from the data. But I did just want to mention some other features. So I recently found online that you can see how often and when particular bits of grass have been cut. So for example, someone messaged me and asked, like, I live in this area, our grass verges have only been cut once this year. And what was quite good was I could go to this page and just type in the road and could see how often it had been cut and when it was due to be cut again. So there are some really good tools online around on already existing on the council website. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can almost create a bit of a toolbox for residents, so that if they want to go and have a look at, you know, performance monitoring, they can go here. If they want to find out about when their grass is being cut next, and they can use this tool. And it's, you know, without knowing that tool exists, then you're just going to email your councillor and ask. But there are some really good things, and it's just kind of that self-service, but also giving people the ability to proactively find the answer for themselves, rather than having to raise it when the information's already there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wasn't aware of that facility, and I use the customer reporting system a lot, and they do have the map and everything you point to and locate stuff. I wasn't aware of this one, and I do get lots of comments, you know, when's the grass going to be cut? In fact, I make that comment myself quite a lot of the time. Isla, did you want to come in on the other 2 points?
I'm going to answer the question on engagement, and I'm going to hand over to Vicky. So we're going to go in the other order, I'm afraid. So I agree, engagement is really important. And I think we have to see this as a tool. It shouldn't be taken in isolation and we just dust our hands off and go, that's it. It needs to be part of our comms. It needs to be part of our reports. It needs to be the thing that feeds that engagement. So I completely agree. If we just use it in isolation, it will only hit a very, very small audience. We need to be able to, what it should do is when we're creating those comms campaigns, we're writing our reports, or we're doing new strategies, or however we are engaging with our audiences, it gives us the real-time data to be able to kind of balance some of those things, or prove some of those things, which is really useful. So I completely agree with you on that. I'm going to ask Vicky to come back on the benchmarking versus our own measures, and kind of making sure we have comparatives which are useful. And I think Kathy Hadley earlier is really useful when she could say, actually, this measure is very similar to our statistical neighbours, so you can get that context. But you're right, we don't want to just kind of follow the herd and assume that everything is good. So I'm going to hand over to Vicky for that one.
Thank you. When we were putting together the measures for the strategy, we did go out and look at other local authorities to see what measures they had in their corporate strategies, to see whether there was anything that was would fit with our ambitions, because like you say, it's a local thing, so it does need to fit with what we actually want to deliver rather than what everyone else is doing. We tried to make sure when we were collecting the measure information, we collected also whether they are benchmarkable, so we know which ones we can go out and find out who's performing in what way, so we can compare ourselves. Some of them come from LG Inform, which is a benchmarking tool that we can use, so we can use those as well to see how our performance compares with other people's performance. And the other thing was we looked at strategies we already had to bring the performance measures into it, so we could do that sort of golden thread. Is that okay? Does that answer?
Chairman, it was also about those measures which, so for example, A2 increase the levels of trust in the council. Well, that's a really great ambition, but it will only come about out of the longevity and delivery of lots of other things within here. And I thought that was a little bit of an inward-looking kind of approach. It may be important to some people, but I think there's a long way to go before that's a measure that's worth actually giving much consideration to, because there's lots of other things that need to be done first. The other question that I asked, Chairman, was around the engagement by people who are not wired up. And there are an awful lot of them in BCP, far more than quite often as council will acknowledge. And they're not just elderly people, of whom there are lots, but they are also a lot of people who don't really have access to proper IT kit anyway. And that's really quite an important consideration too.
So agree, behind the trust statement, like the trust measure, there are lots of different measures, and actually interestingly, when we've done the analyse the results from a resident survey, things like potholes and cleanliness come up really high in terms of the levers that that we can that influence that particular high measure. So you're right, beneath that we mustn't lose sight of those things. And I think your point about potholes and graffiti is really key. There's other things that we see coming through our surveys that influence those bigger measures. And you're right on the engagement. I think again, what I'd say is that the dashboard itself is just a tiny part. That's the source of the information, but it's about really it's my communications marketing team have to bring that alive and reach different audiences. So while it is a tool that we can use, I think we need to make sure that we are talking about how the council is performing across all sorts of different platforms, all sorts of different channels that are not just digital, and that we're making that relevant to people for whatever they are interested in. And that could be different for the different services, but it could also be different for different areas of our residents. So the challenge is knowing what people need to know and where we need to put our focus and priority. But yeah.
And of course, from an ONS perspective, it's a tool for us to help us identify those areas that we need to look more closely at. Okay, thank you for that. Has anybody else got anything more they'd like to add? There are a number of things, rather than waste this discussion, there are a few things that I'd like us to sort of note or agree to note for the record. And if anybody disagrees with any one of these statements, please say so, or we'll take it out. But the board recognises the value of the newly introduced dashboard in terms of providing a mechanism for monitoring the progress of the council against its corporate plan ambitions, and in providing a horizon scanning tool to inform overview and scrutiny work planning. I think that's fairly straightforward. The board notes that the live dashboard will be available for all councillors to review on the council's public website, and that the board members will actively undertake their own independent monitoring. In fact, it's an interesting point there, because I thought maybe we ought to sort of ask for a rapporteur to sort of look at this and come back to the board if they feel they need to bring in a report. It's just something we can think about. The board will circulate quarterly performance monitoring reports as for information items on its agenda. So it'll be an information only, but we will circulate it as part of a board reporting system. But where we will raise matters by exception. And if you notice in the system, there is an exception reporting thing, because you can't possibly sort of review every one of them all the time. But if there's something a red thing that crops up, it needs commenting, we need to. The board will take account of the dashboard when undertaking annual work planning activity. And lastly, officers will be requested to work with all ONS committees to implement similar arrangements as those agreed by the board, in order to utilise the dashboard across the function to drive evidence-led scrutiny. Oh, but it's true, you know, there's evidence there. We should be using evidence to drive our ONS function. So are you happy with that, members? Generally as a statement of what our intent would be with the system. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we'll draw that discussion to an end now. It's 8:20. Does anybody want 5 minutes now, or would you like me to just plough on? You want a break? 5 minutes. We'll make it a quick break then. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, welcome back, members. So now we move on to agenda item 8, progress update on the best value notice. I invite Leader of the Council to introduce this paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is a paper to give a bit of an update on the progress of the best value notice. I know that you have had this before, and it's very much a monitoring piece, but because I kind of hope that we are at the end of this journey, I did just want to give a little bit of background just in case, because I was trying to work out when the last progress update was, and I don't actually think it was. I'm not even sure it was this side of the year. I think it may have been end of 2023, but I couldn't be sure. So I was just going to go back and talk a little bit about it, how we got here, and where we're going now. So it was best value notices are issued from government to facilitate engagement with the authority and to obtain assurance of the steps it is taking to secure compliance with the best value duty as required by the Local Government Act. It's basically a red flag from government to say something's wrong, you need to sort it out, work out what it is, look into it and find a way to deal with it. So this is triggered from a decision in July 2022, which was to ask for financial support from government. Thankfully that wasn't needed, that capital directive we were able to avoid, but the government still decided that it would like to have a bit of an assurance review, and at the same time I believe Chief Executive Graham Farrant was conducting a kind of internal but independent review into some of these issues. The review went ahead, and in March 23, there were some recommendations for improvement around culture, governance and finance. The notice was issued to the council in June 2023 and matched very much with the findings of the Chief Executive's report. We eventually got the issued note, letter from government explaining this in August 2023, and it really related to 4 key points. So one was around member relationships between councillors, but also between councillors and officers, and trying that we needed to look at making that a lot more positive, and also the number of complaints that councillors were making against one another. That was a real red flag for them. Another area was the NTFP and the budget and kind of unrealistic transformation savings being relied upon. We also had the regeneration company Future Places and concerns raised around the governance and its remit, and finally more development and support needed for the leadership team to act as effectively as it could. So when we got this notice last summer, really I think it was quite welcome, because there were I think we were all aware, and any councillors that were around prior to May 2023, I think we were all very familiar with these issues, and actually it was a bit of an opportunity to look in depth at those and see how we can fix them and have a bit more of a transparent council, which has the good governance that we should expect, and try and put those measures in place. So a 42-point action plan was drawn up, which was going to address those issues. We are now at the stage where all of those actions have been completed, and they were completed in advance of the deadline, which was 1 year to date since that letter was issued. Now, the slightly challenging thing here is the best value notice has run out. It ran out on the 3rd of August. We have not yet heard from government on if they wish to renew that or not. The assumption would be, because the corporate team have worked really hard, and I would also say members have worked hard to get these new governance issues into place and address some of those ongoing challenges, that it shouldn't need to be renewed, but I can't say that for sure because really it does come down to what the government wants to do. Just looking at some of the things that are quite wide. Actually, I won't go into any of the specifics because there's 42 of them. But if you do have any questions, then feel free to ask. And I just wanted to mention as well about the SITFA review, which is on the bottom of this paper in Appendix 2. That was one of the things that we needed to produce as part of the best value review. So thankfully there weren't any critical recommendations, but it is also presented so you can have a look at it as well and raise any concerns that you might have there. So yeah, I think that's all to say really, but happy to answer any questions.
Okay, members. Yes, Councillor Northover, thank you.
I was just looking through and remembering that this was like a year ago, and so many of the people have changed since all this happened, and I wonder, don't know if there's some sort of maybe quite casual, not, I don't know what the word is, some sort of communication maybe to us again, just to remind us about what happened, because some of these things could happen again, I guess, without people realizing that they were even wrong. Just remembering about the things about meeting people externally. I don't know if we've ever really had a sort of any sort of communication that's actually told us that specifically that you mustn't do that, and most people probably know that they shouldn't, but there might be people who just think, well, I'm going to go and do that, and you know, so I just thought there might be other things a bit like that as well, because just looking through the names, you know, so many people have changed, and remembering some of the circumstances that led to this, those people have gone, but you know, it wasn't necessarily just about those people, it's stuff that people do.
Did you want to answer that, Leader? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it was a really challenging sort of 4 years. I think the first 4 years of any council are probably difficult, but because of the political balance being so close, I think it was a really toxic environment. But the governance arrangements which are now in place, which have really looked in depth at some of those places where things just weren't working very well, and there was a lot of risk, I think, in some of the processes that weren't in place, and now they're in place, then there's a bit more direction. But I think you're right that when we get new councillors come on board and get elected, we do now have an induction programme, and I'd look to Isla and Graham to potentially confirm that this is part of that induction programme. We do instill some of these values, but maybe an annual reminder to councillors around how we are all accountable for making sure we're delivering best value ourselves. It would be really good. Thanks.
Just to add to that as well, one of the other things we have done is we've gone through some of the specific points to make sure they're in the Constitution. So the Constitution is clear on some of those things. Of course, it all depends on people complying with the Constitution, what's written, and that's, I guess, the difficulty, having worked in a number of local authorities, is that people find different ways of pushing the boundaries, and you know, I don't think you can mitigate against all of them, but I do reflect that actually this is a report that goes back 1 year since we had the notice. But members will remember that the notice was served some months after they'd done the review, and the review was some months after the issues. So it was a very, it was 2.5 years ago or so now, the issues were being raised. So it is difficult because, we're still just trying to make sure that they're confident that we've got measures in place for things that I don't think would happen now. Yeah.
Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes, I just wanted to ask specifically about the point about a member-officer relationship. I wasn't here before I was elected, so I don't have actual experience of what it was like then. But if there was some difficulty between members and officers getting on, I can see that would have been very difficult for officers trying to do their job. And I also am aware what a difficult time that a lot of them are going through in terms of their jobs maybe changing, their salaries may be changing, some of them may be made redundant. And thinking about that, I've found there's a lot of really great officers that cooperate great, but sometimes I feel some of the officers are a little bit reluctant to engage with counsellors, and I can totally understand that from the background of the situation. But I just wondered, from your point of view, how you think we're doing with that, not from the member point of view, but from the officer's point of view. How confident do the officers feel about dealing with us? Maybe this is more of a question for Graham.
I mean, it's all about trying to create the right culture, isn't it? And I think that part of the difficulty for counsellors, we were just talking about contacts and who you contact, and you want to contact the person that does the service, but actually those people are generally not very experienced, not very senior. And there is a danger that you say you want something done, they don't check the rule book because you're a counsellor and you said you want something done, so they take that as an instruction. Of course, the Constitution is very clear that counsellors cannot instruct officers full stop. And yet some of them just don't see that, and they see almost a request, what do you think, as an instruction to do it. And I think that's the balance we're trying to achieve. So I'm quite conscious we need to make sure that everybody's aware of how the system works, how decisions are taken, that the roles and the powers of individual counsellors and individual officers is really clear. And I think the culture then comes behind that we need a culture where people can say, I don't know the answer to that, let me find out, without worrying that, well, you're a counsellor, you've asked them to do something, if they don't just do it, they'll lose their job. And that's where some people come from in the organisation, and we're just trying to change that culture and trying to get people to a place where they're confident, where they know what the rules are, and that they can talk about it up or down the chain or sideways, whichever way they need to. That's quite difficult in a dynamic environment where, one of the most difficult things I think we're asking officers to do at the moment, for many of them, is they've spent years developing a particular service. They work in a service because they believe in that service. And through the cuts we've had to make, we're asking them to come forward with ideas about how they can cut the service. That's really difficult. And that's where a lot of the tension lies, I think, that we're trying to get them to be, more efficient, more productive, all the rest of it. But also in some cases just saying, just cut the service. And that's quite difficult for somebody that's been developing that service, owns it, loves it. And, for every service we provide, I think there'll be at least one counsellor that say it's a fantastic service, don't cut it. And that relationship then is quite difficult because you'll want information about the service, you want to try and protect the service, they want to do the same, but actually we've got to balance the budget as well. And, one of the things that came out that Q1 monitoring report that we discussed earlier, we have been really clear. We've reminded all of the senior directors that none of us have an authority to overspend the budget. If the budget is being stretched and we're forecasting overspend, we have to come back and ask for more resources before we spend it, because none of us have the authority to spend resources that we don't have in the budget. And that's, we've got to be really clear about that, because they will say, well, somebody's asked for it, or it's a statutory responsibility, therefore we have to do it. The answer is no. It might be a statutory responsibility, but you can only do it if you have the budget to do it. So we're trying to make sure we've got all those rules in place whilst empowering and enabling and trying to get that more open culture. And I think that's how you begin to solve it and get a culture of trust in the organisation. And that's what we need. We don't want people to be frightened. We need them to be trusting and to know they can ask. Sorry, that was a much longer answer than I intended.
Stream of consciousness, really, but as somebody who wasn't in a corporate environment, was a one-man band business before I got elected, while I was retired, to actually be dumped almost into a corporate environment, one gets the impression that a lot of especially with the initial training, there is this situation where because, may I use you as an example, because you are that corporate gentleman, you understand you understand your business, but a lot of us coming in didn't understand our business. So we had half an hour of having our laptops delivered to us. Well, I've talked to various people about this, and it's getting quite funny now. But I used a Mac all my working life. I was given half an hour on Windows, and I'm going, what am I doing with this? So one of the things I was going to say on a more positive is that I think every new councillor, especially if they don't come from a corporate ID, is to keep a diary, so they know. So when the questions get asked about new councillors coming in and how the corporate environment works, they can feed back.
Councillor Broadhead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 points to make. One that's probably quite positive, and one maybe a bit less so, I suppose. But I'll start with the good stuff, if I may. And it was just to really echo the leader's comments about the progress that has been made, and the fact that we are in a position where we have satisfied all of the things that were raised in the assurance review. The leader gave a very kind of eloquent summary of how we got to that position. It was a very, very difficult time. I mean, it was actually triggered by the government changing the rules on capital receipts, and as the leader said, we made a preemptive request for capitalisation direction, which I'm really pleased that we never needed, but that came with just the request of it, an assurance review. So we had to do it, even though we never actually needed to ask the government for any formal exceptional financial support. And as the leader said as well, it was quite assuring. It was quite assuring that the government's external assurance review, there's a lot of assuring here, was pretty much identical to the chief exec's internal assurance review, because at that point we were aware of what they were going to be raising, and not that I want to downplay it at all, but compared to many other best value notices, the things that were raised in there were stuff about culture and about the operation, and as a formative new council, rather than really serious problems about the kind of financials, running of a council as we've seen with other areas. Not at all trying to kind of negate the process, but it is great that we are in a position, as the chief executive has pointed out, it's been kind of over 2 years since we started that process, but one hopes that we do look to draw it to a close. And that just takes me on to my second point, which is areas where I still have some concerns. And until, as the leader pointed out, until we are no longer under the best value notice, we are under a best value notice. And in that circumstance, I think it's incumbent upon any local authority to be whiter than white, cleaner than clean, particularly when it concerns demonstrating best value. And I still have some serious concerns about how we are demonstrating best value, particularly when it comes to asset disposals and regeneration. And if I may, Chair, not a week goes by where I don't get a phone call from somebody, A, as former leader, but B, as the cabinet member in charge of regeneration, that tell me that they're having conversations and meetings with senior council leadership about acquisitions, joint ventures, projects, none of which we are formally aware of in the council. Now, I don't want to revisit the Wessex Fields best value conversation, but I do think it demonstrates that you need to have a robust, objective process, and it's absolutely critical. So I've just got 2 questions so that we can really make sure that we are in this arena showing that we are doing best value properly. And the first one is, why has the cross-party group that we set up a few years ago on regeneration been disbanded? Because I think part of the problem why I'm frankly hearing more about what is going on in regeneration from developers that ring me than the council is that cross-party working group, which is good governance, doesn't exist anymore. And secondly, particularly on those regeneration projects, when are we going to see a final update on all of this and a formal update on the process and how this is all going on? Because I do find it very concerning that I'm every single week being told by other people that conversations are happening, and as leader of the opposition and the councillor, I have no clue. So it's just, I know it's a slight segue, but it is about best value, and it was just those 2 questions, probably to the leader, if I may. Thank you.
Yeah, just coming on your last point, we were due to have a paper ONS, I think it was in September, on the regeneration progress, and it's now slipped to October. Yes, it's moved to October. Yeah, leader, thanks.
Thank you. And I think that, you're right in that the regeneration side is a little bit challenging. I think when we took over the council in May, we had to really just unpick everything that was happening in Future Places to try and find out where there was some value in there, what we could take forward internally and fix the governance around that decision making. What I would say is that we do have the report coming to Cabinet in September. We've also had a change in portfolio holder, so I've recently taken on regeneration and planning in their entirety, which is a lot. But I do also have 2 lead members, and particularly Councillor Mark Howell, who's the lead member for regeneration, who's focusing on that project delivery. So I think there are 2 opportunities here. One is the paper that's coming, which will really set out where we are in terms of those key regeneration projects, and then the other one is I would like to get a really solid annual report, at least from each of our lead members, so that they can demonstrate what they've been doing, so everyone is aware. I think that's kind of been missing. I think we would have had it if we didn't have the change in leadership and everything else. But I think that's an opportunity to talk about it a little bit more. On why has the cross-party working group on regeneration been disbanded? I'm really sorry, that I don't know. I can't recall that existing. I think it was probably before my time.
I think there was a concern about the visibility of the Future Places operations, and that's why that committee was established, to give a better visibility cross-party of what Future Places were doing. I'm only surmising that once Future Places is no longer there, that need wasn't there, because that's what it was primarily set up to do. Because I was on that particular committee, but you're right, it has disappeared. But I don't think it was ever. I'm not aware that it was ever formally closed down.
If I may, Chair, it came into being when we recruited the independent chair of Future Places at the time. So previous to that, we'd had all member seminars very regularly. I know because I did most of them, to include all members on the journey on regeneration. When we got the independent board, we then brought a cross-party group to look, yes, at the Future Places workload, but they were tasked with doing regeneration. I think the point is, just because Future Places doesn't exist anymore doesn't mean that there's no need for, and look, we have cross-party groups on the local plan, on a number of other things. And, you know, and I'm not trying to say that there's cloak and dagger things going on, but I just do genuinely think it's very concerning that I hear about a number of high-level conversations. You know, to be really brutal, I've had people ring me up to say that they're striking deals with the council, and they've had, you know, senior conversations, and there's going to be a process following. It could be absolute nonsense, and it probably is. But, you know, when you hear from a number of people that they're having meetings, and I just think there needs to be clearer transparency.
I do agree with you. I mean, particularly the first point, because there is a bit of a gap about certainly my knowledge of regeneration, and we were looking forward to the paper coming forward, which has now been delayed, I think. Because like you, I've wondered what's been going on with regeneration since the team effectively moved in-house. What are they doing? I know we were told their priorities. I'm not sure I know how those priorities were derived and approved. Those are some of the questions I've got. But I'm not aware of any of the discussions that you are, but you're probably privileged to that because of your former position and the role that you've played in regeneration. Not least, of course, is your national role in that area. So I think you're probably fully, you know, in there a lot more than most of us. So, but Leader, did you want to say anything more?
Yeah, I'm not really a high level sort of strategic conversation with you know, people out there kind of person. And actually, where we are with a lot of the sites that we're talking about, nothing's moved. I would absolutely refute like deals are made. From my point of view, I wouldn't even know where to start making deals with people, which is yeah, it's completely out of my comfort zone. So no. However, what I would say is that you know, there are there's some real progress being made in terms of regeneration, in that just changes within the council. We've recently recruited a really promising regeneration infrastructure director who's putting her mark on things. We've got those sites moving forward, and I think it's waiting for when that comes to cabinet with a report that you guys get to have a look at it. That's just that's the process that we go through, and that report could have been much sooner. So much has been delayed because of having not just local elections but then a general election as well. We've then had the summer. I think it's absolutely reasonable that we bring these things in the time we should to scrutiny and then to cabinet, and that they are properly scrutinised. But I certainly am not aware of any high level decisions that have been made, because I certainly haven't made any. Thank you.
Just to say, look, absolutely fine with that answer, and I will keep pushing for a cross-party working group because I do think it's good form, and perhaps it comes after the paper. But to finish on a high, Chair, I do, I would go back to the fact that it's a great position that we're in, that we seem to have completed the action plan, and I'd be more than happy to make a move to say that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is pleased to see the progress that's been made on the action plan in and of itself. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Waters.
Whilst we're giving feedback and ideas about potential good ones, I think what would be great in terms of the culture potentially is maybe next time there's an election and we change councillors and that sort of thing, if we had a kind of party agnostic buddy system for new councillors and old councillors, old not in age, in in experience. And I think that would help with the cultural side of things as well, because if you've got a buddy that's in a completely different party, that might help with everyone getting on.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Councillor Broadhead has made a proposal or a move. Do you have a seconder for that, Councillor Broadhead? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Right, I'm happy to second, Chairman.
Okay, does anybody want to debate that anymore?
Was the proposal?
Would you like to just repeat what you said just now, please, Councillor Broadhead?
Yes.
If you can.
I think I said that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is pleased to see the progress made in delivering the Best Value Notice Action Plan.
Yeah. Okay. Members are in agreement? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we are. There are some issues I'd just like to raise briefly, but I do agree. I mean, who wouldn't agree? That's been a mammoth exercise, actually. And one of the comments I was going to make, and it touches, I think, on what Lisa said about how we maintain the value from that effort that's been put to that, and we ensure that it is maintained. Question I've got for the chief exec: the report says all of this is pretty much okay. But are you happy? Because the report says and what you feel about the organisation may be completely at odds. There are some issues I think I personally have about some of the things that are going on. They're not serious, but nevertheless, I think there are areas that require attention. And they do touch on officer member relations. They do touch on process. Particularly of overview and scrutiny. I've got some concerns about that. I've also got concerns about the amount of time that it takes to get replies from officers, sometimes months and months. There are still some issues. There was a new, I think, an officer member protocol that's been published. I can't remember seeing it, but that also mentioned in the report. I think it was action 35. I've now got to log on to see what it was. Has anybody got their report still open? Number 35. Yeah, it was. Yeah, what is meant by a member-led council? And it's an interesting question but there was a report produced, and then it was sent to senior. What was it? Senior leader. The former leader. Report has now been finalised, published, and circulated amongst the senior managers. So why can't we see it? Yes, yeah, please, yeah.
So it's never going to be perfect, and I think it's never a job done. And we were reflecting today that we turn over about 12% of our staff every year. So that's about 50 a month, new people coming into the organisation to learn the ropes. And we turned over, what, 60, 70% of our councillors at the last election. There's 76 councillors. There's a lot of new relationships to be formed. You know, I've worked in a number of councils. This is probably, I would say, politically the most complex. And bearing in mind, I've worked at Birmingham and Westminster, that says quite a lot. But it does feel politically stable at the moment, and therefore that gives the officers confidence. So my sense is that we're in about as good a position as we would expect to be. And actually, I believe that we feel like a normal council. It's a big council, 404,000 population in an urban conurbation. You know, it's the largest urban authority that doesn't have another layer above it in the country. So we don't have an elected mayor or a combined authority. So we are responsible for everything that happens in our patch. And that brings challenges. There's budgetary challenges, but actually it feels to me like it's as normal as we could be. There will always be challenges. There will always be errant behaviour on the part of officers, for which we have a disciplinary code, and on behalf of members, for which there's a code of conduct, etc. But people always push the boundaries, or they just don't think, or they post something that they really meant to leave as a draft till the following day, and because that's the sort of stuff that happens. But my feeling is, and I've expressed this to MHCLG regularly, it feels like a normal council. It's got tensions, it's got pressures, but it feels normalised. And so, having worked at Birmingham, this feels much calmer than Birmingham did for the whole of the decade I was there. You know, I worked at Westminster in the 1980s. That felt very different, politically charged environment. This doesn't feel like that. It feels like people generally collaborate. And yeah, but there are points of contention, and there are issues that get raised. But I feel that we've got the structures and the processes to deal with them. So that feels good. The member-led authority piece, but that was a phrase that was used quite a lot over the last couple of years. And what I wanted to do was say, let's just define what that really means. Because actually, to a certain extent, every council is member-led. To a large extent, every council is member-led, because you agree the policy framework, you agree the constitution and the budget. That sets a lot of the parameters. But I want to take it a bit further and refine that. We did produce a document. What it effectively does is it expands on the constitution a little in places. So I'm very happy for that. I thought it was on the internet. I thought it had been circulated. Yeah. Well, we're very happy. I mean, very happy to send the specific link around to the members of this committee and indeed to all councillors. But it was just trying to explain. So to officers, what does that member policy shaping and leadership feel like? And to members, how far does that go in terms of defining specific services, and how do you do that? That was just the intention, to give that clarity. I do think, I mean, what has been really good actually has been the feedback from MHCLG civil servants, who have said that our approach has been the most open that they've seen, the most transparent. The fact that that I did a review really surprised them. And the fact that we then just published the action plan of my recommendations and Leslie Seary, the previous Chief Executive Islington, that did their review, they really liked. And they've used that as a model to talk to others, to say, just be open and transparent about it. So I'm confident that we are in as good a place as we could be. We have big challenges. Pay and reward is the biggest for the staffing at the moment. But there are a number of other challenges as well around regeneration and specific sites. So I hear all of that, but I think that's the activity of a normal council, trying to do some things in a big council, but with a very focused conurbation. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah. Sorry, and I should say, one of the other issues in here was about the corporate management team. I should say, I think we've got a very strong corporate management team.
Not particularly, because I know that this has been a journey over the last year, but I think just to say thank you to the officers who have really embraced some of these changes, and also to members who have really embraced it, because I do think there are, if anyone could experience what it was like in the previous council, like, you'd understand. that it was not a nice environment. And the difference that I see every single day in the way members work together, the way they speak to each other, the way we collaborate, the way we disagree, it's just so much more positive and healthy, and actually does the task at hand, you know, with scrutiny, with decision making. And I kind of feel very proud that we have I can genuinely say I think we have a transparent council that is accountable to local residents. I think actually getting residents to a point that they understand that we've done everything we can in terms of that level of transparency, and being able to get the council into a shape where governance is as it should be, is slightly different. However, it has given me a lot of confidence going through this process, and I'm glad that we are where we are. I'm just hoping we don't get another best value placed on us, but that will be up to government to decide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Okay, members, has anybody got anything else they'd like to add to this debate? Okay, in which case we'll shut this item down and we'll move on to the last item, which is the forward plan. It's been published with the agenda. Has anybody got any comments on it? Yes, Councillor Broadhead.
Not sure we're necessarily going to have the time to deal with this, but I remain a bit concerned about things that I read in the press over the last few weeks in terms of devolution. I mean, I read on the BBC website, without hearing anywhere else, that apparently advanced discussions were being had with BCP and other councils about a devolution deal to government. I think there is a group leaders meeting scheduled for the 18th September, with then plans to be submitted a week later. And it feels very, very quick and very rushed. Now, that's what I've heard. That might not be right, but I wonder if the leader could elaborate on where we are and where other non-executive councillors might sit in that process. It's kind of important.
I think that's a very good question, and I have to confess that I've picked up on the noises around this subject, and I even asked our new MP for Bournemouth West about it, and she immediately clammed up. So I thought, oh, there's obviously some truth in this. And you know, the thought of having to go through another reorganisation without actually having completed this particular transformation of the council as it is enough to put me in my grave, I have to say. But it probably will be by the time we get sorted out anyway. But yeah, it's a really good question, and actually I do remember going back even before the local government reforms, that we were talking about combined authority issues between North Dorset, and I mean, I'm sure Councillor Beasley will remember it well. But yeah, are you able to enlighten us anymore, Leader? Thank you.
Yes, of course. It's a good job I didn't disappear then, isn't it? So this has been a really interesting experience, kind of learning more about devolution and what it can offer us. I think the government have been very clear that that's how they want to communicate with local authorities, with kind of bulk areas of local governments or with regions, to be able to have fewer people in the room, I think, when they're trying to get that the flow of information right. From my point of view, I think devolution is a must. I really do. I really struggle with us putting ourselves in a position where we're not going to be able to speak to government and get what we need in terms of investment in our infrastructure, get support, get basically our voices heard in government. And as we've heard throughout this meeting, that voice is so important. Look at our budget issue, like we can't solve that alone. So actually having that connection is going to be really, really important. As far as I know, the expression of interest that needs to go in by the end of September doesn't actually need any specific details on what a new devolution structure would look like. So we don't need to say whether we want it to be a mayoral setup, combined authority, whatever. What we do need to do is indicate partners. And as you can imagine, where we are having those conversations with other councils, it can all feel a little bit like we're playing poker with our hands to our cards to our chest and trusting what each other are saying. I would say we've got some really good relationships with other local authorities, and we're exploring what will be the best in terms of what we want as BCP, but also in terms of what we could achieve on a larger footprint. So the reason why it's not really out there in the public domain is because we're all kind of trying to work out where we sit with each other in many ways. But I think there is a lot of opportunity, and I think when we have something pinned down in over the next few weeks, that's when we need to discuss it as group leaders, because in my view, this is such a vast decision. It's not something we should be making. It's certainly not something that should sit with one person as leader. I do think it needs to be something we all consider. However, the structure and everything else is for further down the line. This is purely an expression of interest in terms of who we would partner with at this point.
Thank you, Leader. And I have to say that your answer sort of worries me a bit, because we don't really know about this, and it's such an important thing that we really ought to. And it was actually on the overview and scrutiny agenda for later in the year. But it sounds to me there's been a lot more going on here than what we understand. We're a fully transparent council, are we? And yet we got a huge thing coming up, and we don't understand about it, what it is, and I regret that, actually. Chief Exec.
Thanks, Tim. Just to say, we did bring a report to the Cabinet about 4 or 5 months ago, mapping out what we were doing on devolution and setting out all the options we'd been looking at. So I think that came through as an update paper. And this is something which has been explored by all administrations since we started BCP Council. And I just want to be really clear, it's not a local government reorganisation. It's under what sort of structure do you want to try and devolve some more powers from the government? So if anything, it's forming a collaboration, not changing the local government structures. Now, some councils, for example, in Hampshire, when they were discussing it, it did lead the districts to start worrying that it was going to be the county trying to mop them up and do an LGR process. That's not any of the discussion that we've been having. It's about what sort of issues might you look at across a wider footprint. And the paper that came to Cabinet basically said what footprint, because we've had conversations with Portsmouth and Southampton on a south central location. We've had conversations with Hampshire and Southampton and Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. That was a couple of years ago on a pan-Hampshire deal. We've had conversations with Dorset on a pan-Dorset deal, and we've had conversations with Wiltshire and Swindon and Dorset and us to look at that sort of Wessex deal. So this is something that's been ongoing. There was a report to Cabinet that mapped that out, no conclusions. Angela Rayner, as Deputy Prime Minister, wrote out in her first week or so saying, OK, I want to hear from you by the end of September. So we're literally responding to that. It is a form that may well have taken a civil servant many days to devise, but it comprises of 3 boxes saying, what do you think? There is no other detail than that. So this literally is, I think we need to come to a conclusion about what sort of configuration we might be willing to consider. Is it BCP alone, and we were too small for the previous government's minimum threshold of 500,000? Is it BCP plus Dorset, which, when you look at what the LEP has produced, actually is 2 different agendas. There's a rural economy and an urban economy, and it's quite difficult to see that as a single deal. Do you go on a wider footprint, including Wiltshire and Somerset, but actually that's even more rural? Or do you look across the border to the east? And the problem with doing that is you cross regional boundaries for health and government and police and all the rest of it. So that's very complicated. And that's literally the discussion we're having, isn't it? And I think we saw it in the press.
Yes, and I would say it really is nothing more complicated. There is no civil servants involved. It's very much on, like, literally leader phoning leader and Graham phoning chief exec and so on. It's not, and there's no structured decision making around this. But I think, if it's something that Scrutiny do want to look at in one way or another, then we need to look at how we can get that on the forward plan in a way that can be kind of delved into. what I think though is Angela Rayner said end of September for expressions of interest. If we don't get that in, I worry that we will be right at the back of the queue for any sort of devolution deal. I think we need to get that in as an expression of interest with a bit of an agreement between who we want to partner with, and then we will progress in terms of creating something from there. But you're absolutely right. One of the things I've expressed in a lot of the kind of networking meetings we've had is that we don't naturally sit with anyone around us. There are some issues around what we kind of feel would be would help us meet our aims in terms of being quite an urban area in the south. But I think that if we don't progress and at least get that expression of interest in, then we're going to be out of the party altogether, and we don't want to be there when we've got a government that's talking about growth.
Councillor Trent.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I have to say that I completely, when I read little snippets of this, and I thought, what on earth is going on? Because I'm one of those people who do not subscribe to the bigger is better movement. You know, I was opposed to the creation of BCP Council, let alone sort of other things, but I'm slightly reassured that we're actually talking about some sort of regional working together and oversight. But been there before, actually, in the 1990s. I think Bournemouth, Poole, Southampton, Portsmouth and most of Dorset were involved in the South Coast Metropole, which was actually designed at the time because we were obviously in the EU to echo an equivalent region in the north of France. And that sort of disappeared. And I know I had a conversation when I visited Cherbourg as mayor a while back, when people remember that and they remember the relationship that they had in the economic development relationship. And, you know, I thought to myself, what on earth has happened to that idea? Because it was quite an active project at the time. This was during the 1990s. It seemed to wither away in the 2000s. But so, as I say, I think there has been something before with the working together, but I would be totally concerned about anything that involved shoving even more decision making up. I do think that we do need a level which we can sort of talk to government at, but at the same time, we're the 12th largest authority in the UK. I thought that actually makes us quite large as we stand. So, you know, I remain to find out more and sort of remain to be reassured that this isn't some other crazy idea that's going to lead to lots of aggravation. But as I say, we have been there before and it seemed to work at the time, but it wasn't a formal arrangement as such. There was no elected mayor or anything like that. So I remain to be convinced.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you referenced me at the beginning of this item, so I thought it was probably a good idea to speak. Unlike the first item on our agenda this evening when I was referenced and didn't speak. I think there is a lot of history to this. I'd certainly concur with it is better to be participating than to hope it will go away. And we did a great deal of work on it in my last term as leader of Bournemouth Council, particularly in the back end, the last 2 years, as we came into the new local authority. And the key to that was, I think, that we participated in all the discussions. We made sure that all members were engaged. Now that has problems with it as well as advantages, obviously, but it is really important that the process is seen to be transparent and that there isn't anything being progressed as an agenda that all members are not aware of. So I would welcome it coming to this board for a rounded discussion at some stage. I appreciate the expressions of interest have to be in by the end of September, which is a ludicrously tight timetable. But we need to see ourselves where we are. And we need to think about what is it we want to happen in a general sense. So with the demise of local enterprise partnerships, out of which it was hoped at one stage some of this might be delivered, particularly the idea of a combined authority. And at that stage, I think the consensus was very much around BCP and Dorset Council as one combined authority. It was neat, and it, although it had conflicts within it, it was probably the least bad option at that time. Although Southwest Hampshire, to incorporate Southampton and Portsmouth, has always economically been higher on the list and always will be, to be working with us. And I think probably the idea of Wessex turning west and so forth is probably the worst option for us economically. But the idea of a combined authority very much was on the agenda. It was focused mainly on infrastructure and housing, because those struck us then, and it probably strikes most people today, as being the two top priorities, which require very substantial funding, which we don't have the ability to raise, and have the greatest economic impacts. So being there at the earliest stage, I would certainly endorse as being our priority. It would have to be, if for no other reason, because if we're not careful, we'll find that the civil servants have created some new structure whereby we get an imposition of an additional layer in one form or another that will not help us with our economic activity and objectives. So it depends. Devolution means different things to different people, and a Devo deal means different things to different people. But certainly we need to be looking at how can we leverage economically what's best for BCP, its residents and its businesses from the government in areas where we can't do it ourselves, and produce for them the growth that they're looking for. And that's achievable, very definitely achievable. It's really a question of how we go about it. But I would recommend strongly, not that I'm in any position of influence these days, but I would recommend very strongly that transparency and engagement from all members is critical to success. And if there is an agenda that develops with government, that's even more important to take people with you, because if it's imposed in any way, it'll be doomed to failure in one way or another, and that isn't what we want.
Thank you, John. Councillor Broadhead.
I'm just going to make a suggestion, Chair, which is the meeting that we have on the 23rd of September. We had 3 items on there, one of which was supposed to be regeneration, but I think we've heard that that's been moved to October anyway. So we've got a gap. It is before the end of September, so it feels to me like a neat slot to, at the very least, with the scrutiny members, be having a wider discussion, even if it's on the, you know, as we've heard from the leader, the broad parameters of where rather than what.
Okay, yeah, I take that on board. I think it's a really good idea. The art, of course, will be in what information we can get at that point. But I think I'll have to. Is it Kellyanne still who's leading on that? No.
Sorry, the chair. It's Glenn Barton and Chris Shepherd. So we'll bring that forward.
Okay, but from a cabinet perspective, it's you. Okay, we probably need to have a chat with you then, leader. Thank you. But yeah, I agree with you. Only if we can accommodate that, I think it'd be a really good idea. Thank you. Anybody else? No. Yeah, thank you.
This isn't totally irrelevant. It's you say open and transparency. Hearing from the local paper rather than comms team or Dem services, it has been an issue where things have come out in the paper and then you hear about it. So what is the comms team or Dem services doing to mitigate some things? I mean, yeah, I've not made myself clear on that. I hope I have. Sorry, if I haven't, please let me know.
Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you're right that this was always a bugbear, and it has been for many years. When we'd go, we get our information from the Echo, and we should be getting it from the council. In this particular circumstance, I had absolutely no idea the leader of Dorset was going to include us in a kind of chat about devolution with a journalist. But just to give a response to that, I personally don't think we should be closing off any options at this point. I think actually the options remain until that end of that deadline, because we don't know if, you know, Dorset could suddenly turn around and go, oh, we're going into a rural thing, bye. So we have to be very aware of like what's going on in the wider environment. So yeah, I wasn't expecting that either. What I would say on a more general sense of information that comes through from the paper is actually to make sure it's fact checked, come to the council and ask, because I might have questions over whether it is actually reliable or not. Yeah, I would much rather, and I know that is also in the best value plan around how we disseminate information to councillors. I certainly have felt that over the last few weeks we've done a really good job on things like the protests, keeping councillors up to date. We've had some really awful incidents in different wards, keeping ward councillors up to date. And I always really appreciate feedback when people say, you know, I wish I'd known about that, or I should have been told about that. I think there is always an opportunity to remind, but in general, you're absolutely right. We're an open and transparent council. I don't think it necessarily means going out to the wider public with very sensitive information, perhaps about something that's critical that's happened in someone's ward. But in terms of providing community leadership, we need to have that information to be able to actually do that role as councillors. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you. Anything else, members? Okay. Thank you. Meeting closed.